nor in regard to sciences and knowledge, was there want of contradiction in our conduct. He did, as all men do, mocked at learned women, and yet he kept continually instructing me. He used to speak with me on all subjects, law excepted, and while constantly procuring books of every kind for me, he frequently repeated the uncertain precept that a lady ought to keep the knowledge she might have more secret than the Calvinist his creed in Catholic countries. And while I by natural consequence endeavored not to show myself more wise or learned than formerly, before the world Narcissus himself was commonly the first who yielded to the vanity of speaking about me and my superiorities. A nobleman of high repute, and at that time valued for his influence, his talents and accomplishments, was living at our court with great applause. He bestowed especial notice on Narcissus, whom he kept continually about him. They once had an argument about the virtue of women. Narcissus repeated to me what had passed between them. I was not wanting with my observations, and my friend required of me a written essay on the subject. I could write French fluently enough. I had laid a good foundation with my teacher. My correspondence with Narcissus was likewise carried on in French, except in French books there was then no elegant instruction to be had. My essay pleased the Count. I was obliged to let him have some little songs, which I had lately been composing. In short, Narcissus appeared to revel without stint in the renown of his beloved, and the story, to his great contentment, ended with a French epistle in heroic verse, which the Count transmitted to him on departing, in which their argument was mentioned, and my friend reminded of his happiness in being destined, after all his doubts and errors, to learn most certainly what virtue was in the arms of a virtuous and charming wife. He showed this poem first of all to me, and then to almost every one, each thinking of the matter what he pleased. Thus did he act in several cases. Every stranger whom he valued must be made acquainted in our house. A noble family was staying for a season in the place. To profit by the skill of our physician in this house, too, Narcissus was looked on as a son. He introduced me there. We found among these worthy persons the most pleasant entertainment for mind and heart. Even the common pastimes of society appeared less empty here than elsewhere. All knew how matters stood with us. They treated us as circumstances would allow, and left the main relation unalluded to. I mention this one family because in the after period of my life it had a powerful influence upon me. Almost a year of our connection had elapsed, and along with it our spring was over. The summer came, and all grew drier and more earnest. By several unexpected deaths, some offices fell vacant, which Narcissus might make pretensions to. The instant was at hand when my whole destiny must be decided. And while Narcissus and all our friends were making every effort to efface some impressions which obstructed him at court, and to obtain for him the wished for situation, I turned with my request to my invisible friend. I was received so kindly that I gladly came again. I confessed without disguise my wish that Narcissus might obtain the place, but my prayer was not importunate, and I did not require that it should happen for the sake of my petition. The place was obtained by a far inferior competitor. I was dreadfully troubled at this news. I hastened to my room, the door of which I locked behind me. The first fit of grief went off in a shower of tears. The next thought was, yet it was not by chance that it happened, and instantly I formed the resolution to be well content with it, seeing even this apparent evil would be for my true advantage. The softest emotions then pressed in upon me, and divided all the clouds of sorrow. I felt that with help like this, there was nothing one might not endure. At dinner, I appeared quite cheerful, to the great astonishment of all the house. Narcissus had less internal force than I, and I was called upon to comfort him in his family too. He had many crosses to encounter, some of which afflicted him considerably, and such true confidence subsisting between us, he entrusted me with all his negotiations for entering on foreign service, were not more fortunate. All this I felt deeply on his account, and mine. All this too I ultimately carried to the place where my petitions had already been so well received. The softer these experiences were, the oftener did I endeavor to renew them. I hoped continually to meet with comfort where I had so often met with it, yet I did not always meet with it. I was as one that goes to warm him in the sunshine, while there is something standing in the way that makes a shadow. What is this, I asked myself. I traced the matter zealously, and soon perceived that it all depended on the situation of my soul. If this was not turned in the straightest direction towards God, I still continued cold. I did not feel his counter-influence. I could obtain no answer. The second question was, what hinders this direction? Here I was in a wide field. I perplexed myself in an inquiry, which lasted nearly all the second year of my attachment to Narcissus. I might have ended the investigation sooner, for it was not long till I had got upon the proper trace. but I would not confess it, and I sought 1,000 outlets. I very soon discovered that the straight direction of my soul was marred by foolish dissipations, and employment with unworthy things. The how and the where were clear enough to me, yet by what means could I help myself, or extricate my mind from the calls of a world where everything was either cold indifference or hot insanity? Gladly would I have left things standing as they were, and lived from day to day floating down with the stream like other people, whom I saw quite happy, but I durst not my inmost. Feelings contradicted me too often, yet if I determined to renounce society, and alter my relations to others, it was not in my power. I was hemmed in, as by a ring drawn round me certain connections, I could not dissolve, and in the matter which lay nearest. To my heart fatalities accumulated and oppressed me more and more. I often went to bed with tears, and after a sleepless night arose again with tears. I required some strong support, and God would not vouchsafe it me, while I was running with the cap and bells. I proceeded now to estimate my doings. All, and each dancing and play, were first put upon their trial. Never was there anything spoken, thought, or written for, or against these practices, which I did not examine, talk of, read, weigh, reject, aggravate, and plague myself about. If I gave up these habits, I was certain that Narcissus would be offended, for he dreaded exceedingly the ridicule which any look of straight-laced conscientiousness gives one in the eyes of the world. And doing what I now looked upon as folly, noxious folly, out of no taste of my own, but merely to gratify him, it all grew woefully irksome to me. Without disagreeable prolixities and repetitions, it is not in my power to represent what pains I took in trying so to counteract those occupations which distracted my attention and disturbed my peace of mind, that my heart, in spite of them, might still be open to the influences of the invisible being. But at last, with pain, I was compelled to admit that in this way the quarrel could not be composed, for no sooner had I clothed myself in the garment of folly than it came to be something more than a mask, than the foolishness pierced and penetrated me through and through. May I here overstep the province of a mere historical detail, and offer one or two remarks on what was then taking place within me? What could it be which so changed my tastes and feelings, that in my 22nd year, nay earlier, I lost all relish for the recreations with which people of that age are harmlessly delighted? Why were they not harmless for me? I may answer, just because they were not harmless, because I was not like others of my years, unacquainted with my soul. No, I knew from experiences which had reached me unsought that there are loftier emotions which afford us a contentment such as it is vain to seek in the amusements of the world, and that in these higher joys there is also kept a secret treasure for strengthening the spirit in misfortune. But the pleasures of society, the dissipations of youth, must needs have had a powerful charm for me, since it was not in my power to engage in them, without participation to act among them. As if they were not there, how many things could I now do, if I liked, with entire coldness, which then dazzled and confounded me, nay, threatened to obtain the mastery over me here? There could no medium be observed, either those delicious amusements, or my nourishing and quickening internal emotions, must be given up. But in my soul the strife had, without my own consciousness, already been decided. Even if there still was anything within me that longed for earthly pleasures, I had now become unfitted for enjoying them, much as a man might hanker after wine. All desire of drinking would forsake him, if he should be placed among full barrels in a cellar, where the foul air was like to suffocate him. Free air is more than wine, this I felt but too keenly, and from the first it would have cost me little, studying to prefer the good to the delightful, if the fear of losing the affection of Narcissus had not restrained me. But at last, when after many thousand struggles and thoughts continually renewed, I began to cast a steady eye upon the bond which held me to him, I discovered that it was but weak, that it might be torn asunder. I at once perceived it to be only as a glass bell, which shut me up in the exhausted airless space. One bold stroke to break the bell in pieces, and thou art delivered. No sooner thought than tried. I drew off the mask, and on all occasions acted as my heart directed. Narcissus I still cordially loved, but the thermometer, which formerly had stood in hot water, was now hanging in the natural air. It could rise no higher than the warmth of the atmosphere directed. Unhappily it cooled very much. Narcissus drew back, and began to assume a distant air. This was at his option, but my thermometer descended. As he drew back, our family observed this, questioned me, and seemed to be surprised. I explained to them with stout defiance that heretofore I had made abundant sacrifices, that I was ready still farther, and to the end of my life, to share all crosses that befell him, but that I required full freedom in my conduct, that my doings and avoidings must depend upon my own conviction, that indeed I would never bigotedly cleave to my own opinion, but, on the other hand, would willingly be reasoned with. Yet, as it concerned my own happiness, the decision must proceed from myself, and be liable to no manner of constraint. The greatest physician could not move me by his reasonings to take an article of food, which perhaps was altogether wholesome and agreeable to many so soon as my experience had shown that on all occasions it was noxious to me, as I might produce coffee for an instance. And just as little, nay, still less would I have any sort of conduct, which misled me preached up and demonstrated upon me as morally profitable. Having so long prepared myself in silence, these debates were rather pleasant than vexatious to me. I gave vent to my soul, I felt the whole worth of my determination, I yielded not a hair's breadth. And those to whom I owed no filial respect were sharply handled and dispatched in the family. I soon prevailed. My mother from her youth had entertained these sentiments, though in her they had never reached maturity, for no necessity had pressed upon her, and exalted her courage to achieve her purpose. She rejoiced in beholding her silent wishes fulfilled through me. My younger sisters seemed to join themselves with me. The second was attentive and quiet. Our aunt had the most to object. The arguments which she employed appeared to her irrefragable, and they were irrefragable, being altogether commonplace. At last, I was obliged to show her that she had no voice in the affair in any sense, and after this she seldom signified that she persisted in her views. She was indeed the only person that observed this transaction close at hand, without, in some degree, experiencing its influence. I do not calumniate her when I say that she had no character and the most limited ideas. My father had acted altogether in his own way. He spoke not much, but often with me on the matter. His arguments were rational, and being his arguments, they could not be impugned. It was only the deep feeling of my right that gave me strength to dispute against him. But the scene soon changed. I was forced to make appeal to his heart, straitened by his understanding. I came out with the most pathetic pleadings. I gave free course to my tongue, and to my tears I showed him how much I loved Narcissus, how much constraint I had for 2 years been enduring, how certain I was of being in the right, that I was ready to testify that certainty by the loss of my beloved bridegroom and prospective happiness, nay, if it were necessary, by the loss of all that I possessed on earth, that I would rather leave my native country, my parents, and my friends, and beg my bread in foreign lands, than act against these dictates of my conscience. He concealed his emotion. He said nothing on the subject for a while, and at last he openly declared in my favor. During all this time, Narcissus forbore to visit us, and my father now gave up the weekly club, where he was used to meet him. The business made a noise at court, and in the town people talked about it, as is common in such cases, which the public takes a vehement interest in, because its sentence has usurped an influence on the resolutions of weak minds. I knew enough about the world to understand that one's conduct is often censured by the very persons who would have advised it, had one consulted them, and independently of this, with my internal composure, I should have looked on all such transitory speculations just as if they had not been. On the other hand, I hindered not myself from yielding to my inclination for Narcissus. To me, he had become invisible, and to him, my feelings had not altered. I loved him tenderly, as it were anew, and much more steadfastly than before. If he chose to leave my conscience undisturbed, then I was his wanting. This condition I would have refused a kingdom with him. For several months I bore these feelings and these thoughts about with me, and finding at last that I was calm and strong enough to go peacefully and firmly to work, I wrote him a polite but not a tender note, inquiring why he never came to see me, as I knew his manner of avoiding to explain himself in little matters, but of silently doing what seemed good to him. I purposely urged him in the present instance. I got a long, and as it seemed to me, pitiful reply in vague style and unmeaning phrases, stating that without a better place he could not fix himself, and offer me hand. That I best knew how hard it had fared with him hitherto, that, as he was afraid lest a fruitless intercourse, so long continued, might prove hurtful to my reputation, I would give him leave to continue at his present distance. So soon as it was in his power to make me happy, he would look upon the word, which he had given me, as sacred. I answered him on the spot that, as our intercourse was known to all the world, it might perhaps be rather late to spare my reputation, for which at any rate my conscience and my innocence were the surest pledges. However, that I hereby freely gave him back his word, and hoped the change would prove a happy one for him. The same hour I received a short reply, which was in all essential particulars entirely synonymous with the first. He adhered to his former statement that so soon as he obtained a situation he would ask me if I pleased to share his fortune with him. This I interpreted as meaning simply nothing. I signified to my relations and acquaintances that the affair was altogether settled. And it was so in fact having 9 months afterwards obtained the much-desired preferment, he offered me his hand, but under the condition that as the wife of a man who must keep house like other people, I should alter my opinions. I returned him many thanks and hastened with my heart and mind away from this transaction, as one hastens from the playhouse, when the curtain falls, and as he a short time afterwards had found a rich and advantageous match, a thing now easy for him, and as I now knew him to be happy in the way he liked me own tranquillity, was quite complete. I must not pass in silence the fact that several times before he got a place and after it, there were respectable proposals made to me, which however I declined without the smallest hesitation, much as my father and my mother could have wished for more compliance on my part. At length, after a stormy March and April, the loveliest May weather seemed to be allotted me. With good health, I enjoyed an indescribable composure of mind. Look around me, as I pleased my loss appeared again to me young and full of sensibility. I thought the universe 1,000 times more beautiful than formerly, when I required to have society and play that in the fair garden tedium might not overtake me. And now, as I did not conceal my piety, I likewise took heart to own my love for the sciences and arts. I drew painted read, and found enough of people to support me, instead of the great world which I had left, or rather, which had left me. A smaller one formed itself about me, which was infinitely richer and more entertaining. I had a turn for social life, and I do not deny that on giving up my old acquaintances, I trembled at the thought of solitude. I now found myself abundantly, perhaps excessively indemnified. My acquaintances, ere long, were very numerous, not at home only, but likewise among people at a distance. My story had been noised abroad, and many persons felt a curiosity to see the woman who had valued God above her bridegroom. There was a certain pious tone to be observed at that time, generally over Germany, in the families of several counts and princes. A care for the welfare of the soul had been awakened, nor were there wanting noblemen who showed a like attention, while in the inferior classes sentiments of this kind were diffused on every side. The noble family whom I mentioned above now drew me nearer to them. They had in the mean, while gathered strength, several of their relations having settled in the town. These estimable persons courted my familiarity. As I did theirs, they had high connections. I became acquainted in their house with a great part of the princes, counts, and lords of the empire. My sentiments were not concealed from anyone. They might be honored or be tolerated. I obtained my object. None attacked me. There was yet another way by which I was again led back into the world. About this period, a stepbrother of my father, who, till now, had never visited the house, except in passing stayed with us for a considerable time, he had left the service of his court, where he enjoyed great influence and honor simply because all matters were not managed quite according to his mind. His intellect was just, his character was rigid in these points. He was very like my father, only the latter had withal a certain touch of softness, which enabled him with greater ease to yield a little in affairs, and though not to do yet to permit some things against his own conviction, and then to evaporate his anger at them, either in silence by himself, or in confidence amid his family. My uncle was a great deal younger, and his independence of spirit had been favored by his outward circumstances. His mother had been very rich, and he still had large possessions to expect from her near and distant relatives, so he needed no foreign increase, whereas my father, with his moderate fortune, was bound to his place by the consideration of his salary. My uncle had become still more unbending from domestic sufferings. He had early lost an amiable wife and a hopeful son, and from that time he appeared to wish to push away from him everything that did not hang upon his individual will. In our family it was whispered now and then with some complacency that probably he would not wed again, and so we children might anticipate inheriting his fortune. I paid small regard to this, but the demeanor of the rest was not a little modified by their hopes. In his own imperturbable firmness of character, my uncle had grown into the habit of never contradicting anyone in conversation. On the other hand, he listened with a friendly air to everyone's opinion, and would himself elucidate and strengthen it by instances and reasons of his own. All who did not know him fancied that he thought as they did, for he was possessed of a preponderating intellect, and could transport himself into the mental state of any man, and imitate his manner of conceiving. With me, he did not prosper quite so well, for here the question was about emotions of which he had not any glimpse, and with whatever tolerance and sympathy and rationality he spoke about my sentiments, it was palpable to me that he had not the slightest notion of what formed the ground of all my conduct. With all his secrecy, we, by found out the aim of his unusual stay with us. He had, as we at length discovered, cast his eyes upon our youngest sister, with the view of giving her in marriage, and rendering her happy, as he pleased, and certainly considering her personal and mental attractions, particularly when a handsome fortune was laid into the scale, along with them, she might pretend to the first matches his feelings towards me. He likewise showed us pantomimically, by procuring me a post of canoness, the income of which I very soon began to draw. My sister was not so contented with his care, as Roman one she now disclosed to me a tender secret, which hitherto she had very wisely kept back, fearing, as in truth it happened, that I would by all means counsel her against connection with a man who was not suited to her. I did my utmost, and succeeded. The purpose of my uncle was too serious, and too distinct the prospect for my sister with her worldly views was too delightful to be thwarted by a passion which her own understanding disapproved. She mustered force to give it up. On her ceasing to resist the gentle guidance of my uncle, the foundation of his plan was quickly laid. She was appointed maid of honor at a neighboring court, where he could commit her to the oversight and the instructions of a lady his friend, who presided there as governess. With great applause, I accompanied her to the place of her new abode. Both of us had reason to be satisfied with the reception we met with, and frequently I could not help in secret smiling at the character, which now as canoness, as young and pious canoness, I was enacting in the world. In earlier times, a situation such as this would have confused me, dreadfully perhaps have turned my head, but now in the midst of all the splendors that surrounded me, I felt extremely cool. With great quietness, I let them frizzle me and deck me out for hours, and thought no more of it than that my place required me to wear that gala livery in the thronged saloons. I spoke with all and each, though no shape or character among them made any impression on me. On returning to my house, nearly all the feeling I brought back with me was that of tired limbs, yet my understanding drew advantage from the multitude of persons whom I saw, and I became acquainted with some ladies' patterns of every virtue of a noble and good demeanor, particularly with the governess, under whom my sister was to have the happiness of being formed. At my return, however, the consequences of this journey in regard to health were found to be less favorable. With the greatest temperance, the strictest diet, I had not been, as I used to be, completely mistress of my time and strength. Food, motion, rising, and going to sleep, dressing, and visiting had not depended, as at home, on my own conveniency. And while in the circle of social life you cannot stop without a breach of courtesy, all that was needful I had willingly performed, because I looked upon it as my duty, because I knew that it would soon be over, and because I felt myself completely healthy. Yet this unusual restless life must have had more effect upon me than I was aware of. Scarcely had I reached home and cheered my parents with a comfortable narrative, when I was attacked by a hemorrhage, which, although it did not prove dangerous or lasting, yet left a weakness after it perceptible for many a day. Here then I had another lesson to repeat. I did it joyfully. Nothing bound me to the world, and I was convinced that here the true good was never to be found, so I waited in the cheerfulest and meekest state, and after having abdicated life I was retained in it. A new trial was awaiting me. My mother took a painful and oppressive ailment which she had to bear 5 years before she paid the debt of nature. All this time we were sharply proved. Often, when her terror grew too strong, she would have us all summoned in the night to her bed, that so at least she might be busied, if not bettered, by our presence. The load grew heavier, nay, scarcely to be borne, when my father too became unwell. From his youth he had frequently had violent headaches, which, however, at longest never used to last beyond 36 hours, but now they were continual, and when they mounted to a high degree of pain, his moanings tore my very heart. It was in these tempestuous seasons that I chiefly felt my bodily weakness, because it kept me from my holiest and dearest duties, or rendered the performance of them hard to an extreme degree. It was now that I could try whether the path which I had chosen was the path of fantasy or truth, whether I had merely thought as others showed me, or the object of my trust had a reality to my unspeakable support. I always found the latter the straight direction of my heart to God. The fellowship of the beloved ones three I had sought and found, and this was what made all things light to me. As a traveler in the dark, my soul, when all was pressing on me from without, hastened to the place of refuge, and never did it return empty. In later times, some champions of religion, who seemed to be animated more by zeal than feeling for it, have required of their brethren to produce examples of prayers, actually heard, apparently as wishing to have seal and signature, that so they might proceed juridically in the matter. How unknown must the true feeling be to these persons, how few real experiences can they themselves have made. I can say that I never returned empty. When in straits and oppression I called on God. This is saying infinitely much more I must not, and cannot say important as each experience was at the critical moment for myself. The recital of them would be flat improbable and insignificant were I to specify the separate cases. Happy was I that 1,000 little incidents in combination proved as clearly as the drawing of my breath, proved me to be living, that I was not without God in the world, he was near to me, I was before him. This is what, with a diligent avoidance of all theological systematic terms, I can, with the greatest truth, declare. Much do I wish that in those times, too, I had been entirely without system. But which of us arrives early at the happiness of being conscious of his individual self, in its own pure combination, without extraneous forms? I was in earnest with religion, I timidly trusted, in the judgments of others. I entirely gave in to the Hallian system of conversion, but my nature would by no means tally with it. According to this scheme of doctrine, the alteration of the heart must begin with a deep terror, on account of sin. The heart in this agony must recognize in a less or greater degree the punishment which it has merited must get a foretaste of hell. And so embitter the delight of sin at last, it feels a very palpable assurance of grace, which, however, in its progress, often fades away, and must again be sought with earnest prayer. Of all this no jot or tittle happened with me. When I sought God sincerely, he let himself be found of me, and did not reproach me about bygone things on looking back. I saw well enough where I had been unworthy, where I still was so, but the confession of my faults was altogether without terror. Not for a moment did the fear of hell occur to me, nay, the very notion of a wicked spirit, and a place of punishment and torment after death, could nowise gain admission into the circle of my thoughts. I considered the men who lived without God, whose hearts were shut against the trust in and the love of the invisible, as already so unhappy, that a hell and external pains appeared to promise rather an alleviation than an increase of their misery. I had but to look upon the persons in this world, who in their breasts gave scope to hateful feelings, who hardened their hearts against the good of whatever kind, and strove to force the evil on themselves, and others who shut their eyes by day that so they might deny the shining of the sun. How unutterably wretched did these persons seem to me, who could have formed a hell to make their situation worse. This mood of mind continued in me without change for half a score of years. It maintained itself through many trials, even at the moving deathbed of my beloved mother. I was frank enough on this occasion, not to hide my comfortable frame of mind from certain pious, but rigorously orthodox people. And I had to suffer many a friendly admonition on that score. They reckoned they were just in season for explaining with what earnestness one should be diligent to lay a right foundation in the days of health and youth. In earnestness, I too determined not to fail. For the moment I allowed myself to be convinced, and fain would I have grown for life distressed and full of fears. But what was my surprise on finding that I absolutely could not when I thought of God. I was cheerful and contented even at the painful end of my dear mother. I did not shudder at the thought of death, yet I learned many and far other things than my uncalled teachers thought of in these solemn hours. By degrees I grew to doubt the dictates of so many famous people, and retained my own sentiments in silence. A certain lady of my friends, to whom I had at first disclosed, too much insisted always on interfering with my business. Of her too I was obliged to rid myself. I at last firmly told her that she might spare herself this labor, as I did not need her counsel, that I knew my God, and would have no guide but him. She was greatly offended, I believe. She never quite forgave me. Such determination to withdraw from the advices and the influence of my friends in spiritual matters produced the consequence that also in my temporal affairs I gained sufficient courage to obey my own persuasions. But for the assistance of my faithful invisible leader, I could not have prospered here. I am still gratefully astonished at his wise and happy guidance. No one knew how matters stood with me, even I myself did not know. The thing, the wicked and inexplicable thing which separates us from the being to whom we owe our life, and in whom all that deserves the name of life must find its nourishment, the thing which we call sin, I yet knew nothing of. In my intercourse with my invisible friend, I felt the sweetest enjoyment of all my powers. My desire of constantly enjoying this felicity was so predominant that I abandoned without hesitation whatever marred our intercourse, and here experience was my best teacher. But it was with me as with sick persons who have no medicine and try to help themselves by diet. Something is accomplished, but far from enough. I could not always live in solitude, though in it I found the best preservative against the dissipation of my thoughts. On returning to the tumult, the impression it produced upon me was the deeper for my previous loneliness. My most peculiar advantage lay in this, that love for quiet was my ruling passion, and that in the end, I still drew back to it, I perceived, as in a kind of twilight my weakness and my misery, and tried to save myself by avoiding danger and exposure. For 7 years I had used my dietetic scheme. I held myself not wicked, and I thought my state desirable. But for some peculiar circumstances and occurrences, I had remained in this position. It was by a curious path that I got farther contrary to the advice of all my friends. I entered on a new connection. Their objections at first made me pause. I turned to my invisible leader. And as he permitted me, I went forward without fear. A man of spirit, heart, and talents had bought a property beside us. Among the strangers whom I grew acquainted with were this person and his family. In our manners, domestic economy, and habits, we accorded well, and thus we soon approximated to each other. Philo, as I proposed to call him, was already middle-aged in certain matters. He was highly serviceable to my father, whose strength was now decaying. He soon became the friend of the family, and finding in me, as he was pleased to say, a person free alike from the extravagance and emptiness of the great world, and from the narrowness and aridness of the still world in the country, he courted intimacy with me, and ere long we were in one another's confidence. To me, he was very pleasing and useful. Though I did not feel the smallest inclination or capacity for mingling in public business, or seeking any influence on it, yet I liked to hear about such matters, liked to know whatever happened far and near, of worldly things. I loved to get a clear though unconcerned perception, feeling sympathy, affection, I reserved for God, for my people, and my friends. The latter were, if I may say so, jealous of Philo in my new connection with him. In more than one sense, they were right in warning me about it. I suffered much in secret, for even I could not consider their remonstrances as altogether empty or selfish. I had been accustomed from of old to give a reason for my views and conduct. But in this case, my conviction would not follow. I prayed to God that here, as elsewhere, he would warn, restrain, and guide me. And as my heart on this did not dissuade me, I went forward on my way with comfort. Philo, on the whole, had a remote resemblance to Narcissus. Only a pious education had more enlivened and concentrated his feelings. He had less vanity, more character. And in business, if Narcissus was delicate, exact, persevering, indefatigable, the other was clear, sharp, quick, and capable of working with incredible ease. By means of him, I learned the secret history of almost every noble personage with whose exterior I had got acquainted in society. It was pleasant for me to behold the tumult off my watchtower from afar. Philo could now hide nothing from me. He confided to me by degrees his own concerns, both inward and outward. I was in fear, because of him, for I foresaw certain circumstances and entanglements. And the mischief came more speedily than I had looked for. There were some confessions he had still kept back, and even at last he told me only what enabled me to guess the worst. What an effect had this upon my heart! I attained experiences which to me were altogether new. With infinite sorrow, I beheld an Agathan who, educated in the groves of Delphi, still owed his school fees, which he was now obliged to pay with their accumulated interest. And this Agathan was my especial friend. My sympathy was lively and complete. I suffered with him. Both of us were in the strangest state. After having long occupied myself with the temper of his mind, I at last turned round to contemplate my own. The thought, "Thou art no better than he," rose like a little cloud before me, and gradually expanded till it darkened all my soul. I now not only thought myself no better than he, I felt this, and felt it, as I should not wish to do again, nor was it any transitory mood for more than a year. I was compelled to feel that had not an unseen hand restrained me, I might have become a Gerard, a Cartouche, a Damiens, or any wretch. You can imagine the tendencies to this. I traced too clearly in my heart. Heavens, what a discovery! If hitherto I had never been able in the faintest degree to recognize in myself the reality of sin by experience, its possibility was now become apparent to me by anticipation in the frightfulest manner. And yet I knew not evil, I but feared it. I felt that I might be guilty, and could not accuse myself of being so. Deeply as I was convinced that such a temperament of soul, as I now saw mine to be, could never be adapted for that union with the invisible being which I hoped for after death, I did not in the smallest fear that I should finally be separated from him with all the wickedness which I discovered in my heart. I still loved him. I hated what I felt, nay, wished to hate it still more earnestly. My whole desire was to be delivered from this sickness and this tendency to sickness, and I was persuaded that the great physician would at length vouchsafe his help. The sole question was what medicine will cure this malady. The practice of virtue. This I could not for a moment think. For 10 years I had already practiced more than mere virtue, and the horrors now first discovered had all the while lain hidden at the bottom of my soul, might they not have broken out with me as they did with David when he looked on Bathsheba? Yet was not he a friend of God? And was not I assured in my inmost heart that God was my friend? Was it then an unavoidable infirmity of human nature? Must we just content ourselves in feeling and acknowledging the sovereignty of inclination? And with the best will, is there nothing left for us but to abhor the fault we have committed, and on the like occasion to commit it again? From systems of morality, I could obtain no comfort, neither their severity, by which they try to bend our inclinations, nor their attractiveness, by which they try to place our inclinations on the side of virtue, gave me any satisfaction. The fundamental notions, which I had imbibed from intercourse with my invisible friend, were of far higher value to me. Once while I was studying the songs composed by David, after that tremendous fall, it struck me very much that he traced his indwelling corruption, even in the substance out of which he had been shaped, yet that he wished to be freed from sin, and that he earnestly entreated for a pure heart. But how was this to be attained? The answer from Scripture. I was well aware of that the blood of Jesus cleanseth us from all sin, was a Bible truth which I had long known. But now for the first time I observed that as yet I had never understood this oft repeated saying. The questions, what does it mean? How is it to be word day and night working out their answers in me? At last, I thought I saw as by a gleam of light that what I sought was to be found in the incarnation of the everlasting Word, by whom all things even we ourselves were made, that the Eternal descended as an inhabitant to the depths, in which we dwell, which he surveys and comprehends, that he passed through our lot from stage to stage, from conception and birth to the grave, that by this marvelous circuit, he again mounted to those shining heights, whither we too must rise in order to be happy. All this was revealed to me, as in a dawning remoteness. Oh, why must we, in speaking of such things, make use of figures, which can only indicate external situations? Where is there in his eyes aught high or deep, aught dark or clear? It is we only that have an under and upper, a night and day. And even for this did he become like us, since otherwise we could have had no part in him. But how shall we obtain a share in this priceless benefit? By faith, the Scripture says. And what is faith? To consider the account of an event as true. What help can this afford me? I must be enabled to appropriate its effects, its consequences. This appropriating faith must be a state of mind peculiar, and to the natural man unknown. Now, gracious Father, grant me faith, so prayed I once in the deepest heaviness of heart. I was leaning on a little table, where I sat, my tear-stained countenance was hidden in my hands. I was now in the condition in which we seldom are, but in which we are required to be if God is to regard our prayers. Oh, that I could but paint what I felt then! A sudden force drew my soul to the cross where Jesus once expired. It was a sudden force, a pull I cannot name it otherwise, such as leads our soul to an absent loved one, an approximation which perhaps is far more real and true than we imagine. So did my soul approach the Son of Man who died upon the cross, and that instant did I know what faith was. This is faith, said I, and started up as if half frightened. I now endeavored to get certain of my feeling of my view, and shortly I became convinced that my soul had acquired a power of soaring upwards, which was altogether new to it. Words fail us in describing such emotions. I could most distinctly separate them from all fantasy. They were entirely without fantasy, without image, yet they gave us just such certainty of their referring to some object as our imagination gives us when it paints the features of an absent lover. When the first rapture was over, I observed that my present condition of mind had formerly been known to me, only I had never felt it in such strength, I had never held it fast, never made it mine. I believe indeed, every human soul at intervals feels something of it. Doubtless it is this which teaches every mortal that there is a God. With such faculty wont from of old to visit me now, and then I had hitherto been well content, and had not by a singular arrangement of events that unexpected sorrow weighed upon me for a 12-month, had not my own ability and strength on that occasion altogether lost credit with me. I perhaps might have remained content with such a state of matters all my days. But now, since that great moment, I had as it were got wings, I could mount aloft above what used to threaten me, as the bird can fly singing, and with ease across the fiercest stream, while the little dog stands anxiously baying on the bank. My joy was indescribable, and though I did not mention it to anyone, my people soon observed an unaccustomed cheerfulness in me, and could not understand the reason of my joy had I but forever held my peace and tried to nourish this serene temper in my soul, had I not allowed myself to be misled by circumstances, so as to reveal my secret. I might then have been saved once more a long and tedious circuit. As in the previous 10 years of my Christian course, this necessary force had not existed in my soul. I had just been in the case of other worthy people, had helped myself by keeping my fancy always full of images, which had some reference to Goethe practice. So far truly useful for noxious images, and their baneful consequences are by that means kept away. Often too our spirit seizes one or other of these spiritual images, and mounts with it a little way upwards like a young bird fluttering from twig to twig. Images and impressions pointing towards God are presented to us by the institutions of the church, by organs, bells, singing, and particularly by the preaching of our pastors of these. I used to be unspeakably desirous, know whether no bodily weakness could keep me from church. The sound of the Sunday bells was the only thing that rendered me impatient on a sickbed. Our head courtchaplain, a gifted man, I heard with great pleasure his colleagues too liked, and I could pick the golden apple of the word from the common fruit, with which on earthen platters it was mingled with public ordinances. All sorts of private exercises were combined, and these two only nourished fancy and a finer kind of sense. I was so accustomed to this track, I reverenced it so much, that even now no higher one occurred to me, for my soul has only feelers, and not eyes. It gropes, but does not see that it could get eyes and look. Now again, therefore, I went with a longing mind to sermon. But alas, what happened? I no longer found what I was wont to find. These preachers were blunting their teeth on the shell. While I enjoyed the kernel, I soon grew weary of them. And I had already been so spoiled that I could not be content with the little they afforded me. I required images, I wanted impressions from without, and reckoned it a pure spiritual desire that I felt. Philo's parents had been in connection with the Herrnhuter community. In his library were many writings of Count Zinzendorf's. He had spoken with me more than once very candidly and clearly on the subject, inviting me to turn over one or two of these treatises if it were. But for the sake of studying a psychological phenomenon, I looked upon the Count and those that followed him as very heterodox, and so the Ebersdorf hymn book which my friend had pressed upon me lay unread. However, in this total destitution of external excitements for my soul, I opened the hymn book as it were by chance, and found in it to my astonishment some songs, which actually, though under a fantastic form, appeared to shadow what I felt. The originality and simplicity of their expression drew me on. It seemed to be peculiar emotions, expressed in a peculiar way. No school technology suggested any notion of formality or commonplace. I was persuaded that these people felt as I did. I was very happy to lay hold of here and there a stanza in their songs to fix it in my memory, and carry it about with me for days. Since the moment when the truth had been revealed to me, some 3 months had in this way passed on. At last, I came to the resolution of disclosing everything to Philo, and asking him to let me have those writings about which I had now become immoderately curious. Accordingly, I did so. Notwithstanding, there was something in my heart which earnestly dissuaded me. I circumstantially related to him all the story, and as he was himself a leading person in it, and my narrative conveyed the sharpest reprimand on him, he felt surprised and moved to an extreme degree. He melted into tears. I rejoiced, believing that in his mind also a full and fundamental change had taken place. He provided me with all the writings I could require, and now I had excessive nourishment for my imagination. I made rapid progress in the Zinzendorfic mode of thought and speech. And be it not supposed that I am yet incapable of prizing the peculiar turn and manner of the Count, I willingly do him justice. He is no empty fantast, he speaks of mighty truths, and mostly in a bold, figurative style. The people who despise him know not either how to value or discriminate his qualities. At that time I became exceedingly attached to him. Had I been mistress of myself, I would certainly have left my friends and country and gone to join him. We should infallibly have understood each other, and should hardly have agreed together long. Thanks to my better genius that now kept me so confined by my domestic duties, I reckoned it a distant journey if I visited the garden. The charge of my aged weakly father afforded me employment enough, and in hours of recreation, I had fancied to procure me pastime. The only mortal whom I saw was Philo. He was highly valued by my father, but with me, his intimacy had been cooled a little by the late explanation. Its influence on him had not penetrated deep, and as some attempts to talk in my dialect had not succeeded with him, he avoided touching on this subject, and the rather as his extensive knowledge put it always in his power to introduce new topics in his conversation. I was thus a Herrnhut sister on my own footing. I had especially to hide this new turn of my temper and my inclinations from the head courtchaplain, whom, as my father confessor, I had much cause to honor, and whose high merits his extreme aversion to the Herrnhut community did not diminish in my eyes. Even then, unhappily, this worthy person had to suffer many troubles on account of me and others. Several years ago, he had become acquainted with an upright, pious gentleman residing in a distant quarter, and had long continued in unbroken correspondence with him. As with one who truly sought God, how painful was it to the spiritual leader when this gentleman subsequently joined himself to the community of Herrnhut, where he lived for a long while, how delightful, on the other hand, when at length he quarreled with the brethren, determined to settle in our neighborhood, and seemed once more to yield himself completely to the guidance of his ancient friend. The stranger was presented as in triumph by the upper pastor to all the chosen lambs of his fold to our house alone. He was not introduced, because my father did not now see company. The gentleman obtained no little approbation. He combined the polish of the court with the winning manner of the brethren, and having also many fine qualities by nature, he soon became the favorite saint with all who knew him, a result at which the chaplain was exceedingly contented. But alas, it was merely in externals that the gentleman had split. With the community in his heart, he was yet entirely a Herrnhuter. He was in truth concerned for the reality of the matter. But yet the gimcracks which the Count had stuck round it were, at the same time, quite adapted to his taste. Besides, he had now become accustomed to this mode of speaking and conceiving, and if he had to hide it carefully from his old friend, the gladder was he, in any knot of trusty persons, to come forth with his couplets, litanies, and little figures, in which, as might have been supposed, he met with great applause. I knew nothing of the whole affair, and wandered quietly along in my separate path for a good while. We continued mutually unknown. Once in a leisure hour I happened to visit a lady who was sick. I found several acquaintances with her, and soon perceived that my appearance had cut short their conversation. I affected not to notice anything, but saw ere long with great surprise some Herrnhut figures stuck upon the wall in elegant frames. Quickly comprehending what had passed before my entrance, I expressed my pleasure at the sight in a few suitable verses. Conceive the wonder of my friends. We explained ourselves instantly, we were agreed, and in each other's confidence. I often henceforth sought opportunities of going out unhappily. I found such only once in the 3 or 4 weeks, yet I grew acquainted with our gentleman apostle, and by degrees with all the body I visited their meetings, when I could with my social disposition. It was quite delightful for me to communicate to others, and to hear from them the feelings which till now I had conceived and harbored by myself. But I was not so completely taken with my friends as not to see that few of them could really feel the sense of those affecting words and emblems, and that from these they drew as little benefit as formerly they did from the symbolic language of the church. Yet notwithstanding, I went on with them, not letting this disturb me. I thought I was not called to search and try the hearts of others. Had not I too, by long continued innocent exercisings of that sort, been prepared for something better? I had my share of profit from our meetings in speaking. I insisted on attending to the sense and spirit, which in things so delicate is rather apt to be disguised by words than indicated by them. And for the rest I left with silent tolerance, each to act according to his own conviction. These quiet times of secret social joy were shortly followed by storms of open bickering and contradiction contentions, which excited great commotion, I might almost say occasioned not a little scandal in court and town. The period was now arrived when our chaplain, that stout gainsayer of the Herrnhut brethren, must discover to his deep, but I trust sanctified, humiliation that his best and once most zealous hearers were now all leaning to the side of that community. He was excessively provoked in the first moments. He forgot all moderation, and could not, even if he had inclined it, retract afterwards. Violent debates took place, in which happily I was not mentioned, both as being an accidental member of those hated meetings, and then, because in respect of certain civic matters our zealous preacher could not safely disoblige either my father or my friend. With silent satisfaction I continued neutral. It was irksome to me to converse about such feelings and objects, even with well-affected people, when they could not penetrate the deepest sense, and lingered merely on the surface, but to strive with adversaries about things on which even friends could scarcely understand each other, seemed to me unprofitable, nay pernicious, for I soon perceived that many amiable noblemen who, on this occurrence, could not shut their hearts to enmity and hatred, had rapidly passed over to injustice, and in order to defend an outward form, had almost sacrificed their most substantial duties. Far as the worthy clergyman might in the present case be wrong, much as others tried to irritate me at him, I could never hesitate to give him my sincere respect. I knew him well. I could candidly transport myself into his way of looking at these matters. I have never seen a man without his weaknesses. Only in distinguished men, they strike us more we wish, and will at all rates have it that persons privileged as they are should. At the same time, pay no tribute, no tax, whatever I honored him as a superior man, and hoped to use the influence of my calm neutrality to bring about, if not a peace, at least a truce. I know not what my efforts might have done. But God concluded the affair more briefly, and took the chaplain to himself on his coffin. All wept who had lately been striving with him about words, his uprightness, his fear of God, no one had ever doubted. I too was ere long forced to lay aside this Herrnhut doll work, which by means of these contentions now appeared before me, in a rather different light. Our uncle had in silence executed his intentions with my sister. He offered her a young man of rank and fortune as a bridegroom, and showed by a rich dowry what might be expected of himself. My father joyfully consented. My sister was free and forewarned. She did not hesitate to change her state. The bridal was appointed at my uncle's castle. Family and friends were all invited, and we came together in the cheerfulest mood. For the first time in my life, the aspect of a house excited admiration in me. I had often heard of my uncle's taste of his Italian architect, of his collections and his library, but comparing this with what I had already seen, I had formed a very vague and fluctuating picture of it in my thoughts. Great, accordingly, was my surprise at the earnest and harmonious impression which I felt on entering the house, in which every hall and chamber deepened if elsewhere pomp and decoration had but dissipated my attention. I felt here concentrated and drawn back upon myself. In like manner, the preparatives for these solemnities and festivals produced a silent pleasure by their air of dignity and splendor. And to me, it seemed as inconceivable that one man could have invented and arranged all this, as that more than one could have worked together in so high a spirit. Yet, withal, the landlord and his people were entirely natural, not a trace of stiffness or of empty form was to be seen. The wedding itself was managed in a striking way. An exquisite strain of vocal music came upon us by surprise, and the clergyman went through the ceremony with a singular solemnity. I was standing by Philo at the time, and instead of a congratulation, he whispered in my ear, "When I saw your sister give away her hand, I felt as if a stream of boiling water had been poured over me. Why? So I inquired. It is always the way with me," said he. "When I see two people joined, I laughed at him, but I have often since had cause to recollect his words." The revel of the party, among whom were many young people, looked particularly glittering and airy, as everything around us was dignified and serious. The furniture, plate, tableware, and table ornaments accorded with the general whole. And if in other houses you would say the architect was of the school of the confectioner, it here appeared as if even our confectioner and butler had taken lessons from the architect. We stayed together several days, and our intelligent and gifted landlord had variedly provided for the entertainment of his guests. I did not, in the present case, repeat the melancholy proof, which has so often in my life been forced upon me, how unhappily a large mixed company are situated. When altogether left to themselves, they have to select the most general and vapid pastimes, that the fools of the party may not want amusement, however it may fare with those that are not such. My uncle had arranged it altogether differently. 2 or 3 marshals, if I may call them so, had been appointed by him. One of them had charge of providing entertainment for the young. Dances, excursions, little games were of his invention, and under his direction. And as young people take delight in being out of doors, and do not fear the influences of the air, the garden and garden hall had been assigned to them, while some additional pavilions and galleries had been erected and appended to the latter, formed of boards and canvas, merely, but in such proportions so elegant and noble they reminded one of nothing but stone and marble. How rare is a festivity in which the person who invites the guests feels also that it is his duty to provide for their conveniences and wants of every kind. Hunting and card parties, short promenades, opportunities for trustful private conversations were afforded the elder persons, and whoever wished to go earliest to bed was sure to be lodged the farthest from noise. By this happy order the space we lived in appeared to be a little world, and yet considered narrowly, the castle was not large without an accurate knowledge of it, and without the spirit of its owner, it would have been impossible to entertain so many people here and quarter each according to his humor. As the aspect of a well-formed person pleases us, so also does a fair establishment, by means of which the presence of a rational, intelligent mind is manifested. We feel a joy in entering even a cleanly house, though it may be tasteless in its structure and its decorations, because it shows us the presence of a person cultivated in at least one sense doubly pleasing. Is it, therefore, when from a human dwelling the spirit of a higher, though merely sensual culture speaks to us? All this was vividly impressed on my observation at my uncle's castle. I had heard and read much of art. Philo, too, was a lover of pictures, and had a fine collection. I myself had often practiced drawing, but I had been too deeply occupied with my emotions, striving exclusively after the one thing needful, which alone I was bent on carrying to perfection. And then such objects of art as I had hitherto seen appeared like all other worldly objects to distract my thoughts. But now for the first time outward things had led me back upon myself. I now first perceived the difference between the natural charm of the nightingale's song and that of a four-voiced anthem pealed from the expressive organs of men. My joy over this discovery I did not hide from my uncle, who, when all the rest were settled at their posts, was wont to come and talk with me in private. He spoke with great modesty of what he possessed, and had produced here with great decision of the views in which it had been gathered and arranged, and I could easily observe that he spoke with a forbearance towards me, seeming in his usual way to rate the excellence which he himself possessed below that other excellence which, in my way of thinking, was the best and properest. If we can conceive it possible, he once observed that the Creator of the world himself assumed the form of his creature, and lived in that manner for a time upon earth. This creature must appear to us of infinite perfection, because susceptible of such a combination with its Maker. Hence, in our idea of man, there can be no inconsistency with our idea of God. And if we often feel a certain disagreement with him and remoteness from him, it is but the more on that account our duty, not like advocates of the wicked spirit, to keep our eyes continually upon the nakedness and weakness of our nature, but rather to seek out every property and beauty by which our pretension to similarity with the divinity may be made good. I smiled and answered, "Do not make me blush, dear uncle, by your complacence in talking in my language. What you have to say is of such importance to me that I wish to hear it in your own most peculiar style, and then what parts of it I cannot quite appropriate, I will endeavor to translate." "I may continue," he replied, "in my own most peculiar way, without any alteration of my tone. Man's highest merit always is as much as possible to rule external circumstances, and as little as possible to let himself be ruled by them. Life lies before us, as a huge quarry lies before the architect. He deserves not the name of architect, except when out of this fortuitous mass he can combine with the greatest economy and fitness and durability some form, the pattern of which originated in his spirit. All things without us, nay, I may add all things on us, are mere elements. But deep within us lies the creative force which out of these can produce what they were meant to be, and which leaves us neither sleep nor rest, till in one way or another without us, or on us that same have been produced. You, my dear niece, have it may be chosen the better part. You have striven to bring your moral being, your earnest, lovely nature, into accordance with itself, and with the highest, but neither ought we to be blamed when we strive to get acquainted with the sentient man in all his comprehensiveness, and to bring about an active harmony among his powers. By such discoursing, we in time grew more familiar, and I begged of him to speak with me as with himself, omitting every sort of condescension. "Do not think," replied my uncle, "that I flatter you when I commend your mode of thinking and acting. I reverence the individual who understands distinctly what it is he wishes, who unweariedly advances, who knows the means conducive to his object, and can seize and use them. How far his object may be great or little, may merit praise or censure, is the next consideration with me. Believe me, love, most part of all the misery and mischief of all that is denominated evil in the world, arises from the fact that men are too remiss to get a proper knowledge of their aims, and when they do know them, to work intensely in attaining them. They seem to me like people who have taken up a notion that they must and will erect a tower, and who yet expend on the foundation not more stones and labor than would be sufficient for a hut. If you, my friend, whose highest want it was to perfect and unfold your moral nature, had, instead of those bold and noble sacrifices, merely trimmed between your duties to yourself and to your family, your bridegroom, or perhaps your husband, you must have lived in constant contradiction with your feelings, and never could have had a peaceful moment." "You employ the word sacrifice," I answered here, "and I have often thought that to a higher purpose as to a divinity, we offer up by way of sacrifice a thing of smaller value, feeling like persons who should willingly and gladly bring a favorite lamb to the altar for the health of a beloved father. Whatever it may be said, he reason or feeling that commands us to give up the one thing for the other, to choose the one before the other. Decision and perseverance are, in my opinion, the noblest qualities of man. You cannot have the ware and the money both at the same time, and he who always hankers for the ware without having heart to give the money for it is no better off than he who repents him of the purchase when the ware is in his hands. But I am far from blaming men on this account. It is not they that are to blame, it is the difficult entangled situation they are in, they know not how to guide themselves in its perplexities. Thus, for instance, you will on the average find fewer bad economists in the country than in towns, and fewer again in small towns than in great, and why man is intended for a limited condition. Objects that are simple near determinate he comprehends, and he becomes accustomed to employ such means as are at hand, but on entering a wider field he now knows neither what he would nor what he should, and it amounts to quite the same whether his attention is distracted by the multitude of objects, or is overpowered by their magnitude and dignity. It is always a misfortune for him when he is induced to struggle after anything with which he cannot connect himself by some regular exertion of his powers. Certainly, pursued he without earnestness, there is nothing to be done in life, yet among the people whom we name cultivated men little earnestness is to be found in labors and employments in arts, nay, even in recreations they proceed, if I may say so with a sort of self-defense, they live as they read a heap of newspapers, only to have done with it. They remind one of that young Englishman at Rome, who said, with a contented air one evening in some company, that today he had dispatched 6 churches and 2 galleries. They wish to know and learn a multitude of things, and precisely those they have the least concern with. And they never see that hunger is not stilled by snapping at the air. When I become acquainted with a man, my first inquiry is with what does he employ himself, and how? And with what degree of perseverance the answer regulates the interest I shall take in him for life. My dear uncle, I replied, you are perhaps too rigorous, you perhaps withdraw your helping hand from here and there, a worthy man to whom you might be useful. Can it be imputed as a fault, said he, to one who has so long and vainly labored on them? And about them, how much we have to suffer in our youth from men who think they are inviting us to a delightful pleasure party, when they undertake to introduce us to the Danaids or Sisyphus, heaven be praised. I have rid myself of these people. If one of them unfortunately comes within my sphere, I forthwith, in the politest manner, compliment him out again. It is from such persons that you hear the bitterest complaints about the miserable course of things, the aridity of science, the levity of artists, the emptiness of poets, and much more of that sort. They do not recollect that they and the many like them are the very persons who would never read a book which had been written, just as they require it, that true poetry is alien to them, that even an excellent work of art can never gain their approbation, except by means of prejudice. But let us now break off, for this is not the time to rail or to complain. He directed my attention to the different pictures hanging on the wall. My eye dwelt on those whose look was beautiful or subject striking. This he permitted for a while. At last, he said, bestow a little notice on the spirit manifested in these other works. Good minds delight to trace the finger of the deity in nature. Why not likewise pay some small regard to the hand of his imitator? He then led my observation to some unobtrusive figures, endeavoring to make me understand that it was the history of art alone which could give us an idea of the worth and dignity of any work of art, that we should know the weary steps of mere handicraft and mechanism, over which the man of talents has struggled in the course of centuries, before we can conceive how it is possible for the man of genius to move with airy freedom on the pinnacle, whose very aspect makes us giddy. With this view he had formed a beautiful series of works, and whilst he explained it, I could not help conceiving that I saw before me a similitude of moral culture. When I expressed my thought to him, he answered, you are altogether right, and we see from this that those do not act well who, in a solitary exclusive manner, follow moral cultivation by itself. On the contrary, it will be found that he whose spirit strives for a development of that kind has likewise every reason at the same time to improve his finer sentient powers, that so he may not run the risk of sinking from his moral height, by giving way to the enticements of a lawless fancy, and degrading his moral nature, by allowing it to take delight in tasteless baubles, if not in something worse. I did not suspect him of leveling at me, but I felt myself struck when I reflected how many insipidities there might be in the songs that used to edify me, and how little favor the figures which had joined themselves to my religious ideas would have found in the eyes of my uncle. Philo, in the meantime, had frequently been busied in the library. He now took me along with him. We admired the selection, as well as the multitude of books they had been collected on my uncle's general principle. There were none to be found among them, but such as either lead to correct knowledge or teach right arrangement, such as either give us fit materials, or further the concordance of our spirit. In the course of my life, I had read very largely in certain branches. There was almost no work unknown to me. The more pleasant was it here to speak about the general survey of the whole, to mark deficiencies, and not as elsewhere see nothing but a hampered confusion, or a boundless expansion. Here too we became acquainted with a very interesting quiet man. He was a physician, and a naturalist he seemed, rather one of the Penates than of the inmates. He showed us the museum which like the library was fixed in glass cases, to the walls of the chambers adorning, and ennobling the space which it did not crowd on this occasion. I recalled with joy the days of my youth, and showed my father many of the things he had been wont to lay upon the sick bed of his little child, just opening its little eyes to look into the world. Then at the same time, the physician in our present and following conversations did not scruple to avow how near he approximated to me in respect of my religious sentiments. He warmly praised my uncle for his tolerance, and his esteem of all that testified or forwarded the worth and unity of human nature, admitting also that he called for a similar return from others, and would shun and condemn nothing else so heartily as individual pretension and narrow exclusiveness. Since the nuptials of my sister, joy had sparkled in the eyes of our uncle. He often spoke with me of what he meant to do for her. And for her children he had several fine estates. He managed them himself, and hoped to leave them in the best condition to his nephews regarding the small estate where he appeared to entertain peculiar thoughts. I will leave it to none, said he, but to a person who can understand and value, and enjoy what it contains, and who feels how loudly every man of wealth and rank, especially in Germany, is called on to exhibit something like a model to others. Most of his guests were now gone. We, too, were making ready for departure, thinking we had seen the final scene of this solemnity, when his attention in affording us some dignified enjoyment produced a new surprise. We had mentioned to him the delight which the chorus of voices, suddenly commencing without accompaniment of any instrument, had given us at my sister's marriage. We hinted at the same time how pleasant it would be were such a thing repeated, but he seemed to pay no heed to us. The livelier was our surprise when he said one evening, "The music of the dance has died away, our transitory youthful friends have left us, the happy pair themselves have a more serious look than they had some days ago to part at such a time, when perhaps we shall never meet again, certainly, never without changes, exalts us to a solemn mood, which I know not how to entertain more nobly than by the music you were lately signifying a desire to have repeated." The chorus, which had in the meanwhile gathered strength, and by secret practice, more expertness, was accordingly made to sing to us a series of 4 and of 8 voiced melodies, which, if I may say so, gave a real foretaste of bliss. Till then I had only known the pious mode of singing, as good souls practice it frequently with hoarse pipes, imagining like wild birds that they are praising God, while they procure a pleasant feeling to themselves, or perhaps I had listened to the vain music of concerts, in which you are at best invited to admire the talent of the singer, and very seldom have even a transient enjoyment. Now, however, I was listening to music, which, as it originated in the deepest feeling of the most accomplished human beings, was by suitable and practiced organs in harmonious unity, made again to address the deepest and best feelings of man, and to impress him at that moment with a lively sense of his likeness to the deity. They were all devotional songs in the Latin language. They sat like jewels in the golden ring of a polished intellectual conversation, and without pretending to edify they elevated me, and made me happy in the most spiritual manner. At our departure he presented all of us with handsome gifts. To me he gave the cross of my order more beautifully, and artfully worked, and enameled than I had ever seen it before. It was hung upon a large brilliant, by which also it was fastened to the chain. This he gave me, he said, as the noblest stone in the cabinet of a collector. My sister with her husband went to their estates, the rest of us to our abodes, appearing to ourselves, so far as outward circumstances were concerned, to have returned to quite an everyday existence. We had been, as it were, dropped from a palace of the fairies down upon the common earth, and were again obliged to help ourselves as we best could. The singular experiences which this new circle had afforded left a fine impression on my mind. This, however, did not long continue in its first vivacity, though my uncle tried to nourish and renew it by sending me certain of his best and most pleasing works of art, changing them from time to time with others which I had not seen. I had been so much accustomed to be busied with myself, in regulating the concerns of my heart and temper, and conversing on these matters with persons of a like mind, that I could not long study any work of art attentively, without being turned by it back upon myself. I was used to look at a picture or copperplate merely as at the letters of a book. Fine printing pleases well, but who would read a book for the beauty of the printing in like manner? I required of each pictorial form that it should tell me something, should instruct, affect, improve me. And after all my uncle's letters to expound his works of art, say what he would, I continued in my former humor. Yet not only my peculiar disposition, but external incidents and changes in our family still farther drew me back from contemplations of that nature, nay, for some time even from myself, I had to suffer, and to do more than my slender strength seemed fit for. My maiden sister had till now been as a right arm to me, healthy, strong, unspeakably good-natured. She had managed all the housekeeping, I myself being busied with the personal nursing of our aged father. She was seized with a catarrh, which changed to a disorder of the lungs in 3 weeks. She was lying in her coffin, her death inflicted wounds on me, the scars of which I am not yet willing to examine. I was lying sick before they buried her. The old ailment in my breast appeared to be awakening. I coughed with violence, and was so hoarse I could not speak beyond a whisper. My married sister, out of fright and grief, was brought to bed before her time. Our old father thought he was about to lose at once his children, and the hope of their posterity, his natural tears, increased my sorrow. I prayed to God that he would give me back a sufferable state of health. I asked him. But to spare my life till my father should die, I recovered. I was what I reckoned well, being able to discharge my duties, though with pain. My sister was again with child, many cares, which in such cases are committed to the mother, in the present instance, fell to me. She was not altogether happy with her husband. This was to be hidden from our father. I was often made judge of their disputes, in which I could decide with the greater safety. As my brother trusted in me, and the two were really worthy persons, only each of them, instead of humoring, endeavored to convince the other, and out of eagerness to live in constant harmony, never could agree. I now learned to mingle seriously in worldly matters, and to practice what of old I had but sung. My sister bore a son. The frailty of my father did not hinder him from traveling to her. The sight of the child exceedingly enlivened, and cheered him at the christening, contrary to his custom. He seemed as if inspired, nay, I might say like a genius with two faces. With the one he looked joyfully forward to those regions, which he soon hoped to enter; with the other to the new hopeful earthly life, which had arisen in the boy, descended from him on our journey home. He never wearied talking to me of the child, its form, its health, and his wish that the gifts of this new denizen of earth might be rightly cultivated. His reflections on the subject lasted when we had arrived at home. It was not till some days afterwards that I observed a kind of fever in him, which displayed itself without shivering in a sort of languid heat, commencing after dinner. He did not yield, however. He went out as usual in the mornings, faithfully attending to the duties of his office, till at last continuous serious symptoms kept him within doors. I never shall forget with what distinctness, clearness, and repose of mind he settled in the greatest order the concerns of his house, nay, the arrangements of his funeral, as he would have done a business of some other person. With a cheerfulness which he never used to show, and which now mounted to a lively joy, he said to me, "Where is the fear of death which I once felt? Shall I shrink at departing? I have a gracious God, the grave awakens no terror in me, I have an eternal life." To recall the circumstances of his death, which shortly followed, forms one of the most pleasing entertainments of my solitude. The visible workings of a higher power in that solemn time, no one shall ever argue from me. The death of my beloved father altogether changed my mode of life. From the strictest obedience, the narrowest confinement, I passed at once into the greatest freedom. I enjoyed it like a sort of food, from which one has long abstained formerly. I very seldom spent 2 hours from home now. I very seldom lived a day there. My friends, whom I had been allowed to visit only by hurried snatches, wished now to have my company without interruption, as I did to have theirs. I was often asked to dinner, at walks and pleasure rejaunts. I never failed. But when once the circle had been fairly run, I saw that the invaluable happiness of liberty consisted not in doing what one pleases, and what circumstances may invite to, but in being able without hindrance or restraint to do in the direct way what one regards as right and proper. And in this instance I was old enough to reach a valuable truth without smarting for my ignorance. One pleasure I could not deny myself; it was as soon as might be to renew and strengthen my connection with the Herrnhut brethren. I hastened accordingly to visit one of their establishments at no great distance. But here I by no means found what I had been anticipating. I was frank enough to signify my disappointment, which they tried to soften by alleging that the present settlement was nothing to a full and fitly organized community. This I did not take upon me to deny, yet in my thought the genuine spirit of the matter might have displayed itself in a small body as well as in a great one. One of their bishops, who was present, a personal disciple of the Count, took considerable pains with me. He spoke English perfectly, and as I too understood a little of it, He reckoned this a token that we both belonged to one class. I, however, reckoned nothing of the kind. His conversation did not in the least satisfy me. He had been a cutler, was a native of Moravia. His mode of thought still savored of the artisan. With Herr von L., who had been a major in the French service, I got upon a better footing, yet I could never bring myself to the submissiveness he showed to his superiors. Nay, I felt as if you had given me a box on the ear when I saw the major's wife and other women more or less like ladies take the bishop's hand and kiss it. Meanwhile, a journey into Holland was proposed, which, however doubtless for my good, did not take place. My sister had been delivered of a daughter, and now it was the turn of us women to exult and consider how the little creature should be bred like one of us. The husband, on the other hand, was not so satisfied. When in the following year another daughter saw the light with his large estates, he wanted to have boys about him, who in future might assist him in his management. My health was feeble. I kept myself in peace, and by a quiet mode of life in tolerable equilibrium, I was not afraid of death. Nay, I wished to die, yet I secretly perceived that God was granting time for me to prove my soul, and to advance still nearer to himself in my many sleepless nights. Especially, I have at times felt something which I cannot undertake to describe. It was as if my soul were thinking separately from the body. She looked upon the body as a foreign substance, as we look upon a garment. She pictured with extreme vivacity events and times long past, and felt by means of this events that were to follow those times, are all gone by what follows likewise will go by the body too, will fall to pieces like a vesture. But I the well-known I am. The thought is great, exalted, and consoling, yet an excellent friend with whom I every day became more intimate instructed me to dwell on it as little as I could. This was the physician whom I met in my uncle's house, and who had since accurately informed himself about the temper of my body and my spirit. He showed me how much these feelings, when we cherish them within us, independently of outward objects, tend as it were to excavate us, and to undermine the whole foundation of our being. To be active, he would say, is the primary vocation of man. All the intervals in which he is obliged to rest, he should employ in gaining clearer knowledge of external things, for this will in its turn facilitate activity. This friend was acquainted with my custom of looking on my body as an outward object. He knew also that I pretty well understood my constitution, my disorder, and the medicines of use for it. Nay, that by continual sufferings of my own or other people's, I had really grown a kind of half-doctor. He now carried forward my attention from the human body and the drugs which act upon it to the kindred objects of creation. He led me up and down, as in the paradise of the first man, only if I may continue my comparison, allowing me to trace in dim remoteness the Creator walking in the garden in the cool of the evening. How gladly did I now see God in nature, when I bore him with such certainty within my heart. How interesting to me was his handiwork. How thankful did I feel that he had pleased to quicken me with the breath of his mouth. We again had hopes that my sister would present us with a boy. Her husband waited anxiously for that event, but did not live to see it. He died in consequence of an unlucky fall from horseback, and my sister followed him soon after she had brought into the world a lovely boy. The 4 orphans they had left I could not look at, but with sadness so many healthy people had been called away before poor sickly me. Might I not also have blights to witness among these fair and hopeful blossoms? I knew the world sufficiently to understand what dangers threaten the precarious breeding of a child, especially a child of quality, and it seemed as if since the period of my youth these dangers had increased. I felt that, weakly as I was, I could not be of much, perhaps of any service to the little ones, and I rejoiced the more on finding that my uncle, as indeed might have been looked for, had determined to devote his whole attention to the education of these amiable creatures. And this they doubtless merited in every sense. They were handsome, and with great diversities, all promised to be well-conditioned, reasonable persons. Since my worthy doctor had suggested it, I loved to trace out family likenesses among our relatives and children. My father had carefully preserved the portraits of his ancestors, and got his own, and those of his descendants drawn by tolerable masters, nor had my mother and her people been forgotten. We accurately knew the characters of all the family, and as we had frequently compared them with each other, we now endeavored to discover in the children the same peculiarities, outward or inward. My sister's eldest son, we thought, resembled his paternal grandfather, of whom there was a fine youthful picture in my uncle's collection. He had been a brave soldier, and in this point, too, the boy took after him, liking arms above all things and busying himself with them. whenever he paid me a visit, for my father had left a very pretty armory, and the boy got no rest till I had given him a pair of pistols and a fowling piece, and he had learned the proper way of using them at the same time in his conduct or bearing. There was nothing like rudeness, far from that he was always meek and sensible. The eldest daughter had attracted my especial love, of which perhaps the reason was that she resembled me, and of all the four seemed to like me best. But I may well admit that the more closely I observed her, as she grew the more she shamed me. I could not look on her without a sentiment of admiration. Nay, I may almost say of reverence. You would scarcely have seen a nobler form, a more peaceful spirit and activity. So equable and universal, no moment of her life was she unoccupied, and every occupation in her hands became dignified. All seemed indifferent to her, so that she could but accomplish what was proper in the place and time, and in the same manner, she could patiently continue unemployed. When there was nothing to be done, this activity, without need of occupation, I have never elsewhere met with. In particular, her conduct to the suffering and destitute was from her earliest youth inimitable. For my part, I freely confess, I never had the gift to make a business of beneficence. I was not niggardly to the poor, nay, I often gave too largely for my means, yet this was little more than buying myself off, and a person needed to be made for me if I was to bestow attention on him directly. The reverse was the conduct of my niece. I never saw her give a poor man money, whatever she obtained from me for this purpose. She failed not in the first place to change for some necessary article. Never did she seem more lovely in my eyes than when rummaging my clothes presses. She was always sure to light on something which I did not wear, and did not need to sew these old cast-off articles together and put them on some ragged child. She thought her highest happiness. Her sister's turn of mind appeared already different. She had much of her mother. She promised to become very elegant and beautiful, and she now bids fair to keep her promise. She is greatly taken up with her exterior from her earliest years. She could decorate and carry herself in a way that struck you. I still remember with what ecstasy, when quite a little creature, she saw herself in a mirror decked in certain precious pearls, once my mother's, which she had by chance discovered, and made me try upon her. Reflecting on these diverse inclinations, it was pleasant for me to consider how my property would after my decease be shared among them, and again called into use. I saw the fowling pieces of my father once more, traveling round the fields on my nephew's shoulder, and birds once more falling from his hunting pouch. I saw my whole wardrobe issuing from the church at Easter confirmation on the persons of tidy little girls, while the best pieces of it were employed to decorate some virtuous burgher, maiden on her marriage day. In furnishing such children, and poor little girls Natalia had a singular delight, though, as I must here remark, she showed not the smallest love, or if I may say it, smallest need of a dependence upon any visible or invisible being such as I had in my youth so strongly manifested. When I also thought that the younger sister on that same day would wear my jewels and pearls at court, I could see with peace my possessions, like my body, given back to the elements. The children waxed apace to my comfort. They are healthy, handsome, clever creatures. That my uncle keeps them from me, I endure without repining. When staying in the neighborhood, or even in town, they seldom see me. A singular personage, regarded as a French clergyman, though no one rightly knows his history, has been entrusted with the oversight of all these children. He has them taught in various places. They are put to board now here, now there. At first I could perceive no plan whatever in this mode of education, till at last our doctor told me, the abbé had convinced my uncle, that in order to accomplish anything by education, we must first become acquainted with the pupil's tendencies, and wishes that these once ascertained, he ought to be transported to a situation where he may as speedily as possible content the former and attain the latter, and so if he have been mistaken may still in time perceive his error, and at last having found what suits him, may hold the faster by it, may the more diligently fashion himself according to it. I wish this strange experiment may prosper with such excellent natures. It is perhaps possible. But there is one peculiarity in these instructors, which I never shall approve of. They study to seclude the children from whatever might awaken them to an acquaintance with themselves, and with the invisible sole faithful friend. I often take it ill of my uncle that on this account he considers me dangerous for the little ones thus in practice. There is no man tolerant. Many assure us that they willingly leave each to take his own way, yet all endeavor to exclude from action every one that does not think as they do. This removal of the children troubles me the more I am convinced of the reality of my belief. How can it fail to have a heavenly origin and actual object? When in practice it is so effectual, is it not by practice alone that we prove our own existence? Why then may we not by a like mode prove to ourselves the influence of that power, who gives us all good things. That I am still advancing, never retrograding, that my conduct is approximating more and more to the image I have formed of perfection, that I every day feel more facility in doing what I reckon proper, even while the weakness of my body so obstructs meccan, all this be accounted for upon the principles of human nature, whose corruption I have so clearly seen into for me at least it cannot. I scarcely remember a commandment to me. There is nothing that assumes the aspect of law. It is an impulse that leads me and guides me always aright. I freely follow my emotions, and know as little of constraint as of repentance. God be praised that I know to whom I am indebted for such happiness, and that I cannot think of it without humility. There is no danger I should ever become proud of what I myself can do, or can forbear to do. I have seen too well what a monster might be formed, and nursed in every human bosom, did not higher influence restrain us. Book Romans 7, chapter Roman 1. Spring had come in all its brilliancy. A storm that had been lowering all day went fiercely down upon the hills. The rain drew back into the country. The sun came forth in all its splendor. And upon the dark vapor rose the lordly rainbow. Wilhelm was riding towards it. The sight made him sad. Ah, said he within himself, must it be that the fairest hues of life appear to us only on a ground of black, and must drops fall? If we are to be enraptured, a bright day is like a dull day if we look at it unmoved. And what can move us but some silent hope that the inborn inclination of our soul shall not always be without an object? The recital of a noble action moves us. The sight of everything harmonious moves us. We feel then, as if we were not altogether in a foreign land. We fancy we are nearer the home towards which our best and inmost wishes impatiently strive. Meanwhile, a pedestrian overtook him, and walking with a stout step by the side of the horse began to keep him company. After a few common words, he looked at the rider and said, "If I am not mistaken, I must have already seen you somewhere." "I too remember you," said Wilhelm. "Had we not some time ago a pleasant sail together?" "Right," replied the other. Wilhelm looked at him more narrowly then, after a pause observed, "I do not know what alteration has occurred in you. Last time we met I took you for a Lutheran country clergyman. You now seem to me more like a Catholic priest." "Today at least you are not wrong," replied the other, taking off his hat and showing him the tonsure. "Where is your company gone? Did you stay long with them?" "Longer than was good. On looking back upon the period which I passed in their society, it seems as if I looked into an endless void. Nothing of it has remained with me." "Here you are mistaken," said the stranger. "Everything that happens to us leaves some trace behind it. Everything contributes imperceptibly to form us. Yet often it is dangerous to take a strict account of that, for either we grow proud and negligent, or downcast and dispirited, and both are equally injurious in their consequences. The safe plan is always simply to do the task that lies nearest us, and this, in the present case," added he with a smile, "is to hasten to our quarters." Wilhelm asked how far Lothario's house was distant. The stranger answered that it lay behind the hill. "Perhaps I shall meet you there," continued he. "I have merely a small affair to manage in the neighborhood. Farewell. Till then." And with this, he struck into a steep path that seemed to lead more speedily across the hill. "Yes, the man is right," said Wilhelm to himself. As he proceeded, "we should think of what is nearest. And for me at present, there is nothing nearer than the mournful errand I have come to do. Let me see whether I can still repeat the speech which is to put that cruel man to shame." He then began reciting to himself. This piece of oratory not a syllable was wanting, and the more his recollection served him, the higher grew his passion, and his courage. Aurelia's sorrows and her death were vividly present to his soul. "Spirit of my friend," exclaimed he, "hover round me, and if thou canst, give some sign to me that thou art softened, art appeased." Amid such words and meditations, he had reached the summit of the hill, and near the foot of its declivity, he now beheld a curious building, which he at once took to be Lothario's dwelling. An old irregular castle, with several turrets and peaked roofs, appeared to have been the primitive erection. But the new additions to it, placed near the main structure, looked still more irregular. A part of them stood close upon the main edifice, others, at some distance, were combined with it by galleries and covered passages. All external symmetry, every shade of architectural beauty, appeared to have been sacrificed to the convenience of the interior. No trace of wall or trench was to be seen, none of avenues or artificial gardens. A fruit and potherb garden reached to the very buildings, and little patches of a like sort showed themselves even in the intermediate spaces. A cheerful village lay at no great distance. The fields and gardens everywhere appeared in the highest state of cultivation. Sunk in his own impassioned feelings, Wilhelm rode along, not thinking much of what he saw. He put up his horse at an inn, and not without emotion hastened to the castle. An old servingman received him at the door, and signified with much good nature that today it would be difficult to get admission to his lordship, who was occupied in writing letters, and had already refused some people that had business with him. Our friend became more importunate. The old man was at last obliged to yield and announce him. He returned and conducted Wilhelm to a spacious ancient hall, desiring him to be so good as wait, since perhaps it might be some time before his lordship could appear. Our friend walked up and down, unrestfully casting now and then a look at the knights and dames, whose ancient figures hung round him on the walls. He repeated the beginning of his speech. It seemed in presence of these ruffs and coats of mail, to answer even better every time there rose any stir. He put himself in posture to receive his man with dignity, meaning first to hand him the letter, then assail him with the weapons of reproach. More than once mistaken, he was now beginning to be really vexed and out of tune, when at last a handsome man in boots and light surtout stepped in from a side door. "What good news have you for me?" said he to Wilhelm, with a friendly voice. "Pardon me that I have made you wait." So speaking, he kept folding a letter which he held in his hand. Wilhelm, not without embarrassment, delivered him Aurelia's paper, and replied, "I bring you the last words of a friend, which you will not read without emotion." Lothario took it and returned to his chamber with it, whereas Wilhelm, through the open door, could very easily observe he addressed and sealed some letters before opening Aurelia's. He appeared to have perused it once or twice. And Wilhelm, though his feelings signified that the pathetic speech would sort but ill with such a cool reception, girded up his mind, went forward to the threshold, and was just about beginning his address when a tapestry door of the cabinet opened, and the clergyman came. "I have got the strangest message you can think of," cried Lothario to him. "Pardon me," continued he, addressing Wilhelm, "if I am not in a mood for speaking further with you at this moment. You remain with us tonight, you abbe." The stranger properly attended to. With these words, he made his guest a bow. The clergyman took Wilhelm by the hand, who followed not without reluctance. They walked along some curious passages in silence, and at last reached a very pretty chamber. The abbé led him in, then left him, making no excuses. Ere long an active boy appeared. He introduced himself as Wilhelm's valet, and brought up his supper in waiting. He had much to say about the order of the house, about their breakfasting and dining labors and amusements, interspersing many things in commendation of Lothario. Pleasant as the boy was, Wilhelm endeavored to get rid of him. As soon as possible he wished to be alone, for he felt exceedingly oppressed and straitened in his new position. He reproached himself with having executed his intention so ill, with having done his errand only half one moment. He proposed to undertake next morning what he had neglected tonight. The next he saw that by Lothario's presence he would be attuned to quite a different set of feelings. The house, too, where he was, seemed very strange to him. He could not be at home in his position intending to undress. He opened his traveling bag with his night clothes. He took out the spirit's veil, which Mignon had packed in along with them. The sight of it increased the sadness of his humor. "Flee, youth, flee," cried he. "What means this mystic word? What am I to flee? Or whither? It were better had the spirit called to me, return to thyself." He cast his eyes on some English copperplates, hung round the room in frames, most of them he looked at with indifference. At last he met with one in which a ship was represented sinking in a tempest. A father with his lovely daughters was awaiting death from the intrusive billows. One of the maidens had a kind of likeness to the Amazon. An indescribable compassion seized our friend. He felt an irresistible necessity to vent his feelings. Tears filled his eyes. He wept, and did not recover his composure till slumber overpowered him. Strange dreams arose upon him towards morning. He was in a garden which in boyhood he had often visited. He looked with pleasure at the well-known alleys, hedges, flower beds. Mariana met him. He spoke to her with love and tenderness, recollecting nothing of any bygone grievance. Ere long his father joined them in his weekday dress, with a look of frankness that was rare in him. He bade his son fetch 2 seats from the garden house, then took Mariana by the hand and led her into a grove. Wilhelm hastened to the garden house, but found it altogether empty. Only at a window in the farther side he saw Aurelia standing. He went forward and addressed her, but she turned not round, and though he placed himself beside her, he could never see her face. He looked out from the window in an unknown garden. There were several people, some of whom he recognized. Frau Melina, seated under a tree, was playing with a rose which she had in her hand. Laert stood beside her, counting money from the one hand to the other. Mignon and Felix were lying on the grass, the former on her back, the latter on his face. Felina came and clapped her hands above the children. Mignon lay unmoved. Felix started up and fled. At first he laughed, while running as Felina followed, but he screamed in terror when he saw the harper coming after him, with large, slow steps Felix, ran directly to a pond. Wilhelm hastened after him. Too late, the child was lying in the water. Wilhelm stood as if rooted to the spot. The fair Amazon appeared on the other side of the pond. She stretched her right hand towards the child and walked along the shore. The child came through the water. By the course her finger pointed to, he followed her. As she went round at last, she reached her hand to him and pulled him out. Wilhelm had come nearer. The child was all in flames. Fiery drops were falling from his body. Wilhelm's agony was greater than ever, but instantly, the Amazon took a white veil from her head and covered up the child with it. The fire was at once quenched. But when she lifted up the veil, two boys sprang out from under it and frolicsomely sported to and fro, while Wilhelm and the Amazon proceeded hand in hand across the garden, and noticed in the distance Mariana and his father walking in an alley, which was formed of lofty trees, and seemed to go quite round the garden. He turned his steps to them, and with his beautiful attendant was moving through the garden, when suddenly the fair-haired Friedrich came across their path, and kept them back with loud laughter and 1,000 tricks. Still, however, they insisted on proceeding, and Friedrich hastened off running towards Mariana, and the father. These seemed to flee before him. He pursued the faster, till Wilhelm saw them hovering down the alley, almost as on wings. Nature, an inclination called on him to go and help them, but the hand of the Amazon detained him. How gladly did he let himself be held! With this mingled feeling, he awoke, and found his chamber shining with the morning beams. Chapter Roman 2. Our friend was called to breakfast by the boy. He found the abb waiting in the hall. Lothario, it appeared, had ridden out. The abb was not very talkative, but rather wore a thoughtful look. He inquired about Aurelia's death, and listened to our friend's recital of it with apparent sympathy. Ah, cried he, the man that discerns with lively clearness what infinite operations art and nature must have joined in before a cultivated human being can be formed, the man that himself as much as possible takes interest in the culture of his fellow many's, ready to despair when he sees how lightly mortals will destroy themselves, will blamelessly or blamably expose themselves to be destroyed. When I think of these things, life itself appears to me so uncertain a gift that I could praise the man who does not value it beyond its worth. Scarcely had he spoken when the door flew violently up. A young lady came rushing in. She pushed away the old servant, who attempted to restrain her. She made right to the abb, and seized him by the arm. Her tears and sobs would hardly let her speak these words. Where is he? Where have you put him? 'Tis a frightful treachery. Confess it now. I know what you are doing. I will after him. Will know where you have sent him. Be calm, my child, replied the abb with assumed composure. Come with me to your room. You shall know it all, only you must have the strength to listen. If you ask me to relate, he offered her his hand, as if he meant to lead her out. I will not return to my room, cried she. I hate the walls where you have kept me prisoner so long. I know it already. The colonel has challenged him. He is gone to meet his enemy, perhaps this very moment. He answered twice. I thought I heard the sound of shots. I tell you, order out a coach, and come along with me, or I will fill the house and all the village with my screaming. Weeping bitterly, she hastened to the window. The abb held her back, and sought in vain to soothe her. They heard a sound of wheels. She threw up the window, exclaiming, he is dead. They are bringing home his body. He is coming out, replied the abb. You perceive he lives. He is wounded, said she wildly, else he would have come on horseback. They are holding him. The wound is dangerous. She ran to the door, and down the stairs. The abb hastened after her, and Wilhelm, following, observed the fair one meet her lover, who had now dismounted. Lothario leaned on his attendant, whom Wilhelm at once knew as his ancient patron Jarno. The wounded man spoke very tenderly and kindly to the tearful damsel. He rested on her shoulder and came slowly up the steps, saluted Wilhelm as he passed, and was conducted to his cabinet. Jarno soon returned, and going up to Wilhelm, it appears, said he, you are predestined everywhere to find a theater and actors. We have here commenced a play which is not altogether pleasant. I rejoice to find you, answered Wilhelm, in so strange an hour. I am astonished, frightened, and your presence already quiets my mind. Tell me, is there danger? Is the baron badly wounded? I imagine not, said Jarno. It was not long till the young surgeon entered from the cabinet. Now what say you, cried Jarno to him? That it is a dangerous piece of work, replied the other, putting several instruments into his leathern pouch. Wilhelm looked at the band, which was hanging from the pouch. He fancied he knew it. Bright contrary colors, a curious pattern, gold and silver wrought in singular figures, marked this band from all the bands in the world. Wilhelm was convinced. He beheld the very pouch of the ancient surgeon, who had dressed his wounds in the green of the forest, and the hope so long deferred of again finding traces of the lovely Amazon, struck like a flame through all his soul. "Where did you get that pouch?" cried he. "To whom did it belong before you? I beg of you tell me. I bought it at an auction." Said the other, "What is it to me? Whom it belonged to?" So speaking, he went out, and Jarno said, "If there would come but one word of truth from our young doctor's mouth, then—" "He did not buy the pouch," said Wilhelm. "Just as little as Lothario is in danger," said the other. Wilhelm stood immersed in many reflections. Jarno asked how he had fared of late. Wilhelm sketched an outline of his history, and when he at last came to speak of Aurelia's death and his message to the place, his auditor exclaimed, "Well, it is strange, most strange." The abbé entered from Lothario's chamber, beckoned Jarno to go in instead of him, and said to Wilhelm, "The Baron bids me ask you to remain with us a day or two, to share his hospitality, and in the present circumstances contribute to his solacement. If you need to give any notice to your people, your letter shall be instantly dispatched. Meanwhile, to make you understand this curious incident of which you have been witness, I must tell you something which indeed is no secret. The Baron had a small adventure with a lady, which excited more than usual attention, the lady having taken him from a rival and wishing to enjoy her victory too ostentatiously. After a time, he no longer found the same delight in her society which he of course forsook, but being of a violent temper, she could not bear her fate with patience. Meeting at a ball, they had an open quarrel. She thought herself irreparably injured and would be revenged. No knight stepped forth to do battle for her, till her husband, whom for years she had not lived with, heard of the affair, and took it up. He challenged the Baron, and today he has wounded him, yet, as I hear, the gallant colonel has himself come still worse off. From this hour our friend was treated in the house as if he had belonged to it. Chapter Roman 3. At times they had read a little to the patient. Wilhelm joyfully performed this service. Lydia stirred not from Lothario's bed. Her care for him absorbed her whole attention. But today the patient himself seemed occupied with thought. He bade them lay aside their book. "Today," said he, "I feel through my whole heart how foolishly we let our time pass. On how many things have I proposed to do, how many have I planned, yet how we loiter in our noblest purposes. I have just read over the scheme of the changes which I mean to make in my estates, and it is chiefly, I may say, on their account that I rejoice at the bullets not having gone a deadlier road." Lydia looked at him with tenderness, with tears in her eyes, as if to ask if his friends could not pretend to any interest in his wish to live. Jarno answered, "Changes, such as you project, require to be considered well on every side before they are resolved on." "Long considerations," said Lothario, "are commonly a proof that we have not the point to be determined clearly in our precipitate proceedings, that we do not know it. I see distinctly that in managing my property, there are several particulars in which the services of my dependents cannot be remitted certain rights, which I must rigidly insist on, but I also see that there are other articles advantageous to me, but by no means indispensable, which might admit of relaxation. Do I not profit by my lands far better than my father did? Is not my income still increasing? And shall I alone enjoy this growing benefit? Shall not those who labor with and for me partake in their degree of the advantages, which expanding knowledge, which a period of improvement are procuring for us?" "'Tis human nature," cried Jarno. "I do not blame myself when I detect this selfish quality. Among the rest, every man desires to gather all things round him, to shape and manage them according to his own pleasure. The money which he himself does not expend he seldom reckons well expended." "Certainly," observed Lothario, "much of the capital might be abated if we consumed the interest less capriciously." "The only thing I shall mention," said the other, "the only reason I can urge against your now proceeding with those alterations, which for a time at least must cause you loss, is that you yourself are still in debt, and that the payment presses hard on you. My advice is therefore to postpone your plan till you are altogether free, and in the meanwhile leave it at the mercy of a bullet or the fall of a tile to annihilate the whole result of my existence and activity. Oh, my friend, it is ever thus. It is ever the besetting fault of cultivated men that they wish to spend their whole resources on some idea, scarcely any part of them on tangible existing objects. Why was it that I contracted debts, that I quarreled with my uncle, that I left my sisters to themselves so long purely for the sake of an idea in America? I fancied I might accomplish something overseas. I hoped to become useful and essential, if any task was not begirt with 1,000 dangers. I considered it trivial, unworthy of me. How differently do matters now appear, how precious, how important seems the duty which is nearest me, whatever it may be. I recollect the letter which you sent me from the Western world," said Jarno. It contains the words I will return. And in my house, amid my fields, among my people, I will say here or nowhere is America. Yes, my friend and I am still repeating it, and still repining at myself, that I am not so busy here as I was there, for certain equable continuous modes of life. There is nothing more than judgment necessary, and we study to attain nothing more so that we become unable to discern what extraordinary services each vulgar day requires of us, or if we do discern them, we find abundance of excuses for not doing them. A judicious man is valuable to himself, but of little value for the general whole. We will not, said Jarno, bear too hard upon judgment. Let us grant that whenever extraordinary things are done, they are generally foolish. Yes, and just because they are not done according to the proper plan, my brother-in-law, you see, is giving up his fortune, so far as in his power, to the community of Herrnhut. He reckons that by doing so he is advancing the salvation of his soul. Had he sacrificed a small portion of his revenue, he might have rendered many people happy, might have made for them. And for himself, a heaven upon earth. Our sacrifices are rarely of an active kind. We as it were abandon what we give away. It is not from resolution but despair that we renounce our property in these days. I confess it, the image of the Count is hovering constantly before me. I have firmly resolved on doing from conviction what a crazy fear is forcing upon him. I will not wait for being cured here. Are the papers they require only to be properly drawn out? Take the lawyer with you, our guest. Will help what I want, you know, as well as I. Recovering or dying, I will stand by it, and say here or nowhere is Herrnhut. When he mentioned dying, Lydia sank before his bed. She hung upon his arm and wept bitterly. The surgeon entered. Jarno gave our friend the papers, and made Lydia leave the room. For heaven's sake, what is this about the Count? Cried Wilhelm, when they reached the hall, and were alone. What Count is it that means to join the Herrnhuters? One whom you know very well, said Jarno. You yourself are the ghost who have frightened the unhappy wiseacre into piety. You are the villain who have brought his pretty wife to such a state that she inclines accompanying him. And she is Lothario's sister, cried our friend. No other, and Lothario knows the whole. Oh, let me fly, cried Wilhelm. How shall I appear before him? What can he say to me? That no man should cast a stone at his brother, that, when one composes long speeches with a view to shame his neighbors, he should speak them to a looking-glass. Do you know that too? And many things besides, said Jarno with a smile. But in the present case, continued he, you shall not get away from me so easily as you did last time. You need not now be apprehensive of my bounty. I have ceased to be a soldier. When I was one, you might have thought more charitably of me. Since you saw me, many things have altered. My prince, my only friend and benefactor, being dead, I have now withdrawn from busy life and its concerns. I used to have a pleasure in advancing what was reasonable. When I met with any despicable thing, I hesitated not to call it so, and men had never done with. Talking of my restless head and wicked tongue, the herd of people dread sound, understanding more than anything they ought to dread stupidity. If they had any notion what was really dreadful, understanding is unpleasant, they must have it pushed aside. Stupidity is but pernicious, they can let it stay. Well, be it so. I need to live. I will by and by communicate my plans to you. If you incline, you shall partake in them. But tell me first how things have gone with you. I feel that you are changed. How is it with your ancient maggot of producing something beautiful and good in the society of gypsies? Do not speak of it, cried Wilhelm. I have been already punished for it. People talk about the stage, but none that has not been upon it can form the smallest notion of it. How utterly these men are unacquainted with themselves, how thoughtlessly they carry on their trade, how boundless their pretensions are. No mortal can conceive. Each would be not only first, but sole. Each wishes to exclude the rest, and does not see that even with them he can scarcely accomplish anything. Each thinks himself a man of marvelous originality, yet with a ravening appetite for novelty, he cannot walk a footstep from the beaten track. How vehemently they counterwork each other. It is only the pitifullest self-love, the narrowest views of interest that unite them, of reciprocal accommodation. They have no idea backbiting, and hidden spitefulness maintain a constant jealousy among them in their lives. They are either rakes or simpletons. Each claims the loftiest respect, each writhes under the slightest blame. All this he knew already, he will tell you. Why then did he not do it? Ever needy, ever unconfiding, they seem as if their greatest fear were reason, and good taste their highest care to secure the majesty of their self-will. Wilhelm drew breath, intending to proceed with his eulogium, when an immoderate laugh from Jarno interrupted him. Poor actors, cried he, threw himself into a chair, and laughed away. Poor dear actors, Do you know, my friend, continued he, recovering from his fit, that you have been describing not the playhouse, but the world, that out of all ranks I could find you characters and doings in abundance to suit your cruel pencil. Pardon me? It makes me laugh again, that you should think these amiable qualities existed on the boards alone. Wilhelm checked his feelings. Jarno's extravagant, untimely laughter had in truth offended him. It is scarcely hiding your misanthropy, said he, when you maintain that faults like these are universal. And it shows your unacquaintance with the world when you impute them to the theater in such a heinous light. I pardon in the player every fault that springs from self-deception, and the desire to please, if he seem not something to himself, and others he is nothing to seem, is his vocation. He must prize his moment of applause, for he gets no other recompense. He must try to glitter, is there to do so. You will give me leave at least to smile in my turn, answered Wilhelm. I should never have believed that you could be so merciful, so tolerant. I swear to you I am serious, fully and deliberately serious. All faults of the man I can pardon in the player. No fault of the player can I pardon in the man. Do not set me upon chanting my lament about the latter. It might have a sharper sound than yours. The surgeon entered from the cabinet, and to the question how his patient was he answered, with a lively air of complacence, extremely well indeed. I hope soon to see him quite recovered. He hastened through the hall, not waiting Wilhelm's speech, who was preparing to inquire again with greater importunity about the leathern case. His anxiety to gain some tidings of his Amazon inspired him with confidence in Jarno. He disclosed his case to him, and begged his help. You, that know so many things, said he, can you not discover this? Jarno reflected for a moment, then turning to his friend, be calm, said he, give no one any hint of it. We shall come upon the fair one's footsteps. Never fear, at present I am anxious only for Lothario. The case is dangerous. The kindliness and comfortable talking of the doctor tells me, so we should be quit of Lydia, for here she does no good. But how to set about the task, I know not. Tonight I am looking for our old physician. We shall then take further counsel. Chapter Roman 4. The physician came. It was the good old little doctor, whom we know already, and to whom we were obliged for the communication of the pious manuscript. First of all, he visited the wounded man, with whose condition he appeared to be by no means satisfied. He had next a long interview with Jarno, but they made no allusion to the subject of it when they came to supper. Wilhelm saluted him in the kindest manner, and inquired about the harper. We have still hopes of bringing round the hapless creature, answered the physician. He formed a dreary item in your limited and singular way of life, said Jarno. How has it fared with him, tell me? Having satisfied Jarno's curiosity, the physician thus proceeded, I have never seen another man so strangely circumstanced. For many years he has not felt the smallest interest in anything without him, scarcely paid the smallest notice to it. Wrapped up in himself, he has looked at nothing but his own hollow empty me, which seemed to him like an immeasurable abyss. It was really touching when he spoke to us of this mournful state. Before me cried he, I see nothing behind me, nothing but an endless night in which I live in the most horrid solitude. There is no feeling in me but the feeling of my guilt, and this appears but like a dim, formless spirit far before me. Yet here there is no height, no depth, no forwards, no backwards. No words can express this never-changing state. Often in the agony of this sameness, I exclaim with violence, forever, forever. And this dark, incomprehensible word is clear and plain to the gloom of my condition. No ray of divinity illuminates this night. I shed all my tears by myself, and for myself, nothing is more horrible to me than friendship and love, for they alone excite in me the wish that the apparitions which surround me might be real. But these two specters also have arisen from the abyss to plague me, and at length to tear from me the precious consciousness of my existence, unearthly though it be. You should hear him speak, continued the physician, when in hours of confidence he thus alleviates his heart. I have listened to him, often with the deepest feelings when pressed by anything, and as it were compelled for an instant to confess that a space of time has passed. He looks astounded, then again refers the alteration to the things about him, considering it as an appearance of appearances, and so rejecting the idea of progress in duration. One night he sung a song about his gray hairs. We all sat round him weeping. Oh, get it for me, cried Wilhelm. But have you not discovered any trace of what he calls his crime? Inquired Jarno. Nor found out the reason of his wearing such a singular garb of his conduct at the burning of the house of his rage against the child. It is only by conjectures that we can approximate to any knowledge of his fate. To question him directly contradicts our principle. Observing easily that he was of the Catholic religion, we thought perhaps confession might afford him some assuagement. but he shrinks away with the strangest gestures. Every time we try to introduce the priest to him, however, not to leave your curiosity respecting him entirely. Unsatisfied, I may communicate our suppositions on the subject in his youth. We think he must have been a clergyman, hence, probably his wish to keep his beard and long cloak. The joys of love appear to have remained for many years unknown to him, late in life, as we conceive some aberration with a lady, very nearly related to him, then her death, the consequence of an unlucky creature's birthave, altogether crazed his brain. His chief delusion is a fancy that he brings misfortune everywhere along with him, and that death, to be unwittingly occasioned by a boy, is constantly impending over him. At first he was afraid of Mignon, not knowing that she was a girl, then Felix frightened him. And as with all his misery he has a boundless love of life, this may perhaps have been the origin of his aversion to the child. "What hopes have you of his recovery?" inquired our friend. "It advances slowly," answered the physician. "Yet it does advance. He continues his appointed occupations. We have now accustomed him to read the newspapers. He always looks for them with eagerness." "I am curious about his songs," said Jarno. "Of these I can engage to get you several," replied the doctor. "Our parson's eldest son, who frequently writes down his father's sermons, has, unnoticed by the harper, marked on paper many stanzas of his singing, out of which some songs have gradually been pieced together." Next morning Jarno met our friend, and said to him, "We have to ask a kindness of you. Lydia must for some time be removed. Her violent, unreasonable love and passionateness hinder the Baron's recovery. His wound requires rest and calmness, though with his healthy temperament it is not dangerous. You see how Lydia tortures him with her tempestuous anxieties, her ungovernable terrors, her never-dreaming tears. And enough," he added with a smile, after pausing for a moment, "our doctor expressly requires that she must quit us for a while. We have got her to believe that a lady, one of her most intimate friends, is at present in the neighborhood, wishing and expecting instantly to see her. She has been prevailed upon to undertake a journey to our lawyer's, which is but 2 leagues off. This man is in the secret. He will woefully lament that Fraulein Theresa should just have left him again. He will seem to think she may still be overtaken. Lydia will hasten after her, and if you prosper will be led from place to place at last. If she insist on turning back, you must not contradict her, but the knight will help you. The coachman is a cunning knave, and we shall speak with him before he goes. You are to travel with her in the coach, to talk to her and manage the adventure." "It is a strange and dubious commission that you give me," answered Wilhelm. "How painful is the sight of true love injured! And am I to be the instrument of injuring it? I have never cheated any person so, for it has always seemed to me that if we once begin deceiving with a view to good and useful purposes, we run the risk of carrying it to excess." "Yet you cannot manage children otherwise," said Jarno. "With children it may do," said Wilhelm, "for we love them tenderly, and take an open charge of them. But with our equals, in behalf of whom our heart is not so sure to call upon us for forbearance, it might frequently be dangerous. Yet do not think," he added, after pausing for a moment, "that I purpose to decline the task on this account, honoring your judgment, as I do, feeling such attachment to your noble friend, such eagerness to forward his recovery, by whatever means, I willingly forget myself and my opinions. It is not enough that we can risk our life to serve a friend in the hour of need. We should also yield him our convictions, our dearest passions, our best wishes. We are bound to sacrifice in helping him. I undertake the charge, though it is easy to foresee the pain I shall have to suffer from the tears, from the despair of Lydia. And for this no small reward awaits you," answered Jarno. "Fraulein Theresa, whom you get acquainted with, is a lady such as you will rarely see. She puts many a man to shame, I may say. She is a genuine Amazon, while others are but pretty counterfeits that wander up and down the world in that ambiguous dress." Wilhelm was struck. He almost fancied that in Theresa he would find his Amazon again, especially as Jarno, whom he importuned to tell him more, broke off abruptly and went away. The new near hope of once more seeing that beloved and honored being awoke 1,000 feelings in his heart. He now looked upon the task which had been given him as the intervention of a special providence. The thought that he was minded treacherously to carry off a helpless girl from the object of her sincerest, warmest love dwelt but a moment in his mind, as the shadow of a bird flits over the sunshiny earth. The coach was at the door. Lydia lingered for a moment, as she was about to mount. "Salute your lord again. For me," said she to the old servant, "tell him that I shall be home before night." Tears were standing in her eyes as she again looked back when the carriage started. She then turned round to Wilhelm, made an effort to compose herself, and said in Fraulein Theresa, You will find a very interesting person. I wonder what it is that brings her hither, for you must know Lothario. And she once passionately loved each other in spite of the distance. He often used to visit her. I was staying with her, then I thought they would have lived and died for one another. But all at once it went to wreck. No creature could discover why he had seen me, and I must confess that I was envious of Teresa's fortune, that I scarcely hid my love from him that, when he suddenly appeared, to choose me in her stead, I could not but accept of him. She behaved to me beyond my wishes, though it almost seemed as if I had robbed her of this precious lover. But ah, how many thousand tears and pains that love of his has cost me. At first we met only now and then, and by stealth at some appointed place. But I could not long endure that kind of life in his presence. Only was I happy, wholly happy far from him. My eyes were never dry, my pulse was never calm. Once he stayed away for several days. I was altogether in despair. I ordered out my carriage, and surprised him here. He received me tenderly, and had not this unlucky quarrel happened, I should have led a heavenly life with him. But since the time he began to be in danger, and in pain, I shall not say what I have suffered at this moment. I am bitterly reproaching myself that I could leave him for a single day. Wilhelm was proceeding to inquire about Teresa when they reached the lawyer's house. This gentleman came forward to the coach, lamenting woefully that Fraulein Teresa was already gone. He invited them to breakfast, signifying, however, that the lady might be overtaken in the nearest village. They determined upon following her. The coachman did not loiter. They had soon passed several villages, and yet come up with nobody. Lydia now gave orders for returning. The coachman drove along, as if he did not understand her, as she insisted with redoubled vehemence. Wilhelm called to him, and gave the promised token. The coachman answered that it was not necessary to go back by the same road. He knew a shorter, and at the same time, greatly easier one. He turned aside across a wood and over large commons. At last, no object they could recognize appearing, he confessed that unfortunately he had lost his way, declaring at the same time that he would soon get right again. As he saw a little town before him, night came on. The coachman managed so discreetly that he asked everywhere and nowhere waited for an answer. He drove along all night. Lydia never closed an eye in the moonshine. She was constantly detecting similarities, which as constantly turned out to be dissimilar. In the morning things around seemed known to her, and but more strange on that account. The coach drew up before a neat little country house. A young lady stepped out and opened the carriage door. Lydia looked at her with a stare of wonder, looked round, looked at her again, and fainted in the arms of Wilhelm. Chapter Roman 5. Wilhelm was conducted to a little upper room. The house was new, as small nearly as it could be, and extremely orderly and clean. And Teresa, who had welcomed him and Lydia at the coach, he had not found his Amazon. She was another, and an altogether different woman, handsome, and but of middle stature. She moved about with great alertness, and it seemed as if her clear blue open eyes let nothing that occurred escape them. She entered Wilhelm's room, inquiring if he wanted anything. Pardon me, said she, for having lodged you in a chamber which the smell of paint still renders disagreeable. My little dwelling is but just made ready. You are handling this room, which is appointed for my guests. Would that you had come on some more pleasant errand. Poor Lydia is like to be a dull companion. In other points also you will have much to pardon. My cook has run away from me at this unseasonable time, and a servingman has bruised his hand. The case might happen I had to manage everything myself, and if it were so, why then we should just put up with it. One is plagued so with nobody, as with one's servants. None of them will serve you, scarcely even serve himself. She said a good deal more on different matters in general. She seemed to like speaking. Wilhelm inquired for Lydia if he might not see her, and endeavor to excuse himself. It will have no effect at present, said Teresa. Time excuses, as it comforts. Words in both cases are of little effect. Lydia will not see you. Keep him from my sight, she cried. When I was leaving her, I could almost despair of human nature. Such an honorable countenance, so frank a manner, and this secret guile. Lothario, she has quite forgiven in a letter to the poor girl. He declares my friends persuaded me, my friends compelled me. Among these she reckons you, and she condemns you with the rest. She does me too much honor in so blaming me, said Wilhelm. I have no pretension to the friendship of that noble gentleman on this occasion. I am but a guiltless instrument. I will not praise what I have done. It is enough that I could do it. It concerned the health, it concerned the life of a man whom I value more than anyone I ever knew before. Oh, what a man is he, Fraulein, and what men are they that live about him in their society. I for the first time, I may well say, carried on a conversation. For the first time was the inmost sense of my words returned to me, more rich, more full, more comprehensive. From another's mouth what I had been groping for was rendered clear to me. What I had been thinking I was taught to see. Unfortunately, this enjoyment was disturbed at first by numerous anxieties and whims, and then by this unpleasant task. I undertook it with submission, for I reckoned it my duty, even though I sacrificed my feelings, to comply with the request of this gifted company of men. While he spoke, Teresa had been looking at him with a very friendly air. Oh, how sweet is it to hear one's own opinion uttered by a stranger tongue? We are never properly ourselves, until another thinks entirely as we do. My own opinion of Lothario is perfectly the same as yours. It is not every one that does him justice, and therefore all that know him better are enthusiastic in esteem of him. The painful sentiment that mingles with the memory of him in my heart cannot hinder me from thinking of him daily. A sigh heaved her bosom as she spoke thus, and a lovely tear glittered in her right. I think not, continued she, that I am so weak, so easy to be moved. It is but the eye that weeps. There was a little wart upon the under eyelid. They have happily removed it, but the eye has been weak ever since. The smallest cause brings a tear into it. Here sat the little wart. You cannot see a vestige of it now. He saw no vestige, but he saw into her eye. It was clear as crystal. He almost imagined he could see to the very bottom of her soul. We have now said, she pronounced the watchword of our friendship, let us get entirely acquainted. As fast as possible, the history of every person paints his character. I will tell you what my life has been. Do you too place a little trust in me, and let us be united even when distance parts us. The world is so waste and empty, when we figure only towns and hills and rivers in it. But to know of some one here and there, whom we accord with, who is living on with us even in silence, makes our earthly ball a peopled garden. She hastened off, engaging soon to take him out to walk. Her presence had affected him agreeably. He wished to be informed of her relation to Lothario. He was called. She came to meet him from her room. While they descended necessarily one by one the straight and even steepish stairs, she said, all this might have been larger and grander had I chosen to accept the offers of your generous friend. But to continue worthy of him, I must study to retain the qualities which gave me merit in his eyes. Whereas the steward, asked she, stepping from the bottom of the stairs. You must not think, continued she, that I am rich enough to need a steward. The few acres of my own little property, I myself, can manage well enough. The steward is my new neighbor's, who has bought a fine estate beside us. Every point of which I am acquainted with. The good old gentleman is lying ill of gout. His men are strangers here. I willingly assist in settling them. They took a walk through fields, meadows, and some orchards. Everywhere Teresa kept instructing the steward, nothing so minute, but she could give account of it, and Wilhelm had reason to wonder at her knowledge, her precision, the prompt dexterity with which she suggested means for ends. She loitered nowhere, always hastened to the leading points, and thus her task was quickly over. Salute your master, said she, as she sent away the man. I mean to visit him as soon as possible, and wish him a complete recovery. There now, she added with a smile, as soon as he was gone, I might soon be rich. My good neighbor, I believe, would not be disinclined to offer me his hand. The old man with the gout, cried Wilhelm. I know not how at your years you could bring yourself to make so desperate a determination, nor am I tempted to it, said Teresa. Whoever can administer what he possesses has enough, and to be wealthy is a burdensome affair, unless you understand it. Wilhelm testified his admiration at her skill in husbandry concerns, decided inclination, early opportunity, external impulse, and continued occupation in a useful business. Said, she make many things which were at first far harder possible in life. When you have learned what causes stimulated me in this pursuit, you will cease to wonder at the talent you now think strange. On returning home, she sent him to her little garden. Here he could scarcely turn himself, so narrow were the walks, so thickly was it sown and planted. On looking over to the court, he could not help smiling. The firewood was lying there, as accurately sawed, split, and piled as if it had been part of the building and had been intended to continue permanently. There the tubs and implements, all clean, were standing in their places. The house was painted white and red. It was really pleasant to behold whatever can be done by handicraft, which knows not beautiful proportions, but labors for convenience. Cheerfulness and durability appeared united. In this spot they served him up dinner in his own room. He had time enough for meditating especially. It struck him that he should have got acquainted with another person of so interesting a character, who had been so closely related to Lothario. It is just, said he to himself, that a man so gifted should attract round him gifted women. How far the influence of manliness and dignity extends, would that others did not come so woefully short compared with him. Yes, confess thy fear when thou meetest with thy Amazon, this woman of women. In spite of all thy hopes and dreaming, thou wilt find her in the end to thy humiliation, and thy shame highs bright. Chapter Romans 6. Wilhelm had passed a restless afternoon, not altogether without tedium, when towards evening his door opened, and a handsome hunter boy stepped forward with a bow. Shall we have a walk, said the youth. and in the instant Wilhelm recognized Teresa by her lovely eyes. "Pardon me this masquerade," said she, "for now alas it is nothing more. But as I am going to tell you of the time, when I so enjoyed the world, I will recall those days, by every method to my fancy. Come along, even the place where we have rested so often from our hunts and promenades, shall help me." They went accordingly on their way. Teresa said to her attendant, "It is not fair that I alone should speak. You already know enough of me. I nothing about you tell me in the mean, while something of yourself, that I may gather courage to submit to you my history and situation. Alas," said Wilhelm, "I have nothing to relate but error on the back of error, deviation following deviation, and I know none from whom I would more gladly hide my present and my past embarrassments than from yourself. Your look, the scene you move in, your whole temperament and manner prove to me that you have reason to rejoice in your bygone life, that you have traveled by a fair clear path in constant progress, that you have lost no time, that you have nothing to reproach yourself withal." Teresa answered with a smile, "Let us see if you will think so after you have heard my history." They walked along among some general remarks. Teresa asked him, "Are you free?" "I think I am," said he. "And yet I do not wish it good," said she. "That indicates a complicated story. You also will have something to relate." Conversing thus, they ascended the hill, and placed themselves beside a lofty oak, which spread its shade far out on every side. "Here," said she, "beneath this German tree, will I disclose to you the history of a German maiden. Listen to me patiently. My father was a wealthy nobleman of this provincia, cheerful, clear-sighted, active, able man, a tender father, an upright friend, an excellent economist. I knew but one fault in him: he was too compliant to a wife, who did not know his worth. Alas, that I should have to say so of my mother. Her nature was the opposite of his. She was quick and changeful, without affection, either for her home or for me, her only child, extravagant but beautiful, sprightly, full of talent. The delight of a circle she had gathered round her. Her society, in truth, was never large, nor did it long continue the same. It consisted principally of men, for no woman could like to be near her, still less could she endure the merit or the praise of any woman. I resembled my father, both in form and disposition. As the duckling with its first footsteps seeks the water, so from my earliest youth the kitchen, the storeroom, the granaries, the fields were my selected element. Cleanliness and order in the house seemed, even while I was playing in it, to be my peculiar instinct, my peculiar object. This tendency gave my father pleasure, and he directed step by step my childish endeavor into the suitablest employments. On the contrary, my mother did not like me, and she never for a moment hid it. I waxed in stature with my years, increased my turn for occupation, and my father's love to me when we were by ourselves, when walking through the fields, when I was helping to examine his accounts. It was then I could see how glad he was while gazing on his eyes. I felt as if I had been looking in upon myself, for it was in the eyes that I completely resembled him. But in the presence of my mother, he lost this energy, this aspect. He excused me mildly when she blamed me unjustly, and violently he took my part, not as if he would protect me, but as if he would extenuate the demerit of my good qualities. To none of her caprices did he set himself in opposition. She began to be immensely taken with a passion for the stage. A theatre was soon got up of men of all shapes and ages, crowding to display themselves along with her upon her boards. She had abundance of women. On the other hand, there was often a scarcity. Lydia, a pretty girl who had been brought up with me, and who promised from the first to be extremely beautiful, had to undertake the secondary parts. The mothers and the aunts were represented by an ancient chambermaid, while the leading heroines, lovers, and shepherdesses of every kind, were seized on by my mother. I cannot tell you how ridiculous it seemed to me to see the people, every one of whom I knew full well, standing on their scaffold, and pretending, after they had dressed themselves in other clothes, to pass for something else than what they were in my eyes. They were never anything but Lydia and my mother, this baron, and that secretary, whether they appeared as counts and princes or as peasants, and I could not understand how they meant to make me think that they were sad or happy, that they were indifferent or in love, liberal or avaricious, when I well knew the contrary to be the case. Accordingly, I very seldom stayed among the audience. I always snuffed their candles, that I might not be entirely without employment. I prepared the supper, and next morning, before they rose, I used to have their wardrobe all sorted, which commonly the night before they had left in a chaotic state. To my mother this activity appeared quite proper, but her love I could not gain. She despised me, and I know for certain that she more than once exclaimed with bitterness, "If the mother could be as uncertain as the father, you would scarcely take this housemaid for my daughter." Such treatment, I confess, at length entirely estranged me. From her, I viewed her conduct as the conduct of a person unconnected with me. And being used to watch our servants like a falcon for this, be it said in passing, is the ground of all true housekeeping. The proceedings of my mother and her friends at the same time naturally forced themselves upon my observation. It was easy to perceive that she did not look on all men alike. I gave sharper heed, and soon found out that Lydia was her confidant, and had herself by this opportunity become acquainted with a passion which from her earliest youth she had so often represented. I was aware of all their meetings, but I held my tongue, hinting nothing to my father, whom I was afraid of. Troubling at last, however, I was obliged to speak. Many of their enterprises could not be accomplished without corrupting the servants. These now began to grow refractory. They despised my father's regulations, disregarded my commands. The disorders which arose from this I could not tolerate. I discovered all, complained of all to my father. He listened to me calmly. Good girl, replied he with a smile, I know it all. Be quiet, bear it patiently, for it is on thy account alone that I endure it. I was not quiet, I had not patience. I in secret blamed my father, for I did not think that any reason should induce him to endure such things. I called for regularity from all the servants. I was bent on driving matters to extremity. My mother had been rich before her marriage, yet she squandered more than she had a right to, and this, as I observed, occasioned many conferences between my parents for a long time. The evil was not helped, till at last the passions of my mother brought it to a head. Her first gallant became unfaithful in a glaring manner. The house, the neighborhood, her whole condition grew offensive to her. She insisted on removing to a different estate there. She was too solitary. She insisted on removing to the town. There she felt herself eclipsed among the crowd of much that passed between my father and her. I know nothing, however. He at last determined under stipulations, which I did not learn, to consent that she should take a journey which she had been meditating to the south of France. We were now free. We lived as if in heaven. I do believe my father could not be a loser had he purchased her absence. By a considerable sum all our useless domestics were dismissed, and fortune seemed to smile on our undertakings. We had some extremely prosperous years. All things succeeded to our wish. But alas, this pleasing state was not of long continuance. Altogether unexpectedly, my father had a shock of palsy. It lamed his right side, and deprived him of the proper use of speech. We had to guess at everything that he required, for he never could pronounce the word that he intended. There were times when this was dreadfully afflicting to us. He would require expressly to be left alone with me. With earnest gestures he would signify that everyone should go away, and when we saw ourselves alone, he could not speak the word he meant. His impatience mounted to the highest pitch. His situation touched me to the inmost heart. Thus much seemed certain. He had something which he wished to tell me, which especially concerned my interest. What longing did I feel to know it! At other times I could discover all things in his eyes, but now it was in vain. Even his eyes no longer spoke, only this was clear: he wanted nothing, he desired nothing. He was striving to discover something to me, which unhappily I did not learn. His malady revisited him. He grew entirely inactive, incapable of motion, and a short time afterwards he died. I know not how it had got rooted in my thoughts that somewhere he had hid a treasure, which he wished at death to leave me, rather than my mother. I searched about for traces of it while he lived, but I could meet with none at his death. A seal was put on everything I wrote to my mother, offering to continue in the house and manage for her. She refused, and I was obliged to leave the place. A mutual testament was now produced. It gave my mother the possession and the use of all, and I was left, at least throughout her life, dependent on her. It was now that I conceived I rightly understood my father's beckonings. I pitied him for having been so weak he had let himself be forced to do unjustly to me, even after he was dead. Certain of my friends maintained that it was little better than if he had disinherited me. They called upon me to attack the will by law, but this I never could resolve on doing. I reverenced my father's memory too much. I trusted in destiny. I trusted in myself. There was a lady in the neighborhood, possessed of large property, with whom I had always been on good terms. She gladly received me. I engaged to superintend her household, and ere long the task grew very easy to me. She lived regularly. She loved order in everything, and I faithfully assisted her in struggling with her steward and domestics. I am neither of a niggardly nor grudging temper, but we women are disposed to insist more earnestly than men that nothing shall be wasted. Embezzlement of all sorts is intolerable to us. We require that each enjoy exactly in so far as right entitles him. Here I was in my element. Once more I mourned my father's death in silence. My protectress was content with me. One small circumstance alone disturbed my peace. Lydia Returned, my mother had been harsh enough to cast the poor girl off after having altogether spoiled her. Lydia had learned with her mistress to consider passions. As her occupation, she was wont to curb herself in nothing. On her unexpected reappearance, the lady whom I lived with took her. In she wished to help me, but could train herself to nothing. About this time, the relatives and future heirs of my protectress often visited the house to recreate themselves with hunting. Lothario was frequently among them. It was not long till I had noticed, though without the smallest reference to myself, how far he was superior to the rest. He was courteous towards all, and Lydia seemed ere long to have attracted his attention to her, constantly engaged in something. I was seldom with the company. While he was there, I did not talk so much as usual, for I will confess it, lively conversation from of old had been to me the finest seasoning of existence. With my father I was wont to talk of everything that happened. What you do not speak of you will seldom accurately think of. No man had I ever heard with greater pleasure than I did Lothario. When he told us of his travels and campaigns, the world appeared to lie before him clear and open. As to me, the district was in which I lived and managed. We were not entertained with marvelous personal adventures, the extravagant half-truths of a shallow traveler who is always painting out himself, and not the country he has undertaken to describe. Lothario did not tell us his adventures, he led us to the place itself. I have seldom felt so pure a satisfaction. But still higher was my pleasure when I heard him talk one evening about women. The subject happened to be introduced. Some ladies of the neighborhood had come to see us, and were speaking in the common style about the cultivation of the female mind. Our sex, they said, was treated unjustly. Every sort of higher education men insisted on retaining for themselves. They admitted us to no science. They required us either to be dolls or family drudges. To all this Lothario said not much. But when the party was a little thinned, he gave us his opinion more explicitly. It is very strange, cried he, that men are blamed for their proceeding here. They have placed woman on the highest station she is capable of occupying, and where is there any station higher than the ordering of the house? While the husband has to vex himself with outward matters, while he has wealth to gather and secure, while perhaps he takes part in the administration of the state, and everywhere depends on circumstances, ruling nothing, I may say, while he conceives that he is ruling, much compelled to be but politic, where he would willingly be reasonable to dissemble, where he would be open to be false, where he would be upright, while thus for the sake of an object which he never reaches, he must every moment sacrifice the first of objects. Harmony with himself. A reasonable housewife is actually governing in the interior of her family, has the comfort and activity of every person in it to provide for and make possible what is the highest happiness of mortals, if not to execute what we consider right and good, to be really masters of the means conducive to our aims. And where should or can our nearest aims be? But in the interior of our home, all those indispensable and still to be renewed supplies. Where do we expect, do we require to find them, if not in the place where we rise and where we go to sleep, where kitchen and cellar, and every species of accommodation for ourselves and ours, is to be always ready? What unvarying activity is needed to conduct this constantly recurring series in unbroken living order? How few are the men to whom it is given to return regularly like a star to command their day as they command their night, to form for themselves their household instruments, to sow, and to reap, to gain, and to expand, and to travel round their circle with perpetual success and peace and love. It is when a woman has attained this inward mastery that she truly makes the husband whom she loves a master. Her attention will acquire all sorts of knowledge, her activity will turn them all to profit. Thus is she dependent upon no one, and she procures her husband genuine independence, that which is interior and domestic. Whatever he possesses, he beholds secured; what he earns, well employed, and thus he can direct his mind to lofty objects. And if fortune favors, he may act in the state the same character which so well becomes his wife at home. He then described to us the kind of wife he wished. I reddened, for he was describing me. As I looked and lived, I silently enjoyed my triumph. And the more as I perceived from all the circumstances that he had not met me individually, that indeed he did not know me. I cannot recollect a more delightful feeling in my life than this, when a man whom I so highly valued gave the preference not to my person, but to my inmost nature. What a recompense did I consider it! What encouragement did it afford me! So soon as they were gone, my worthy benefactress, with a smile, observed to me, pity that men often think and speak of what they will never execute else. Here were a special match, the exact thing for my dear Teresa. I made sport of her remark, and added that indeed men's understanding gave its vote for household wives, but that their heart and imagination longed for other qualities. and that we household people could not stand a rivalry with beautiful and lovely women. This was spoken for the ear of Lydia. She did not hide from us that Lothario had made a deep impression on her heart, and in reality he seemed at each new visit to grow more and more attentive to her. She was poor and not of rank, she could not think of marriage, but she was unable to resist the dear delight of charming. And of being charmed, I had never loved, nor did I love at present. But though it was unspeakably agreeable to see in what light my turn of mind was viewed, how high it was ranked by such a man, I will confess I still was not altogether satisfied. I now wished that he should be acquainted with me, and should take a personal interest in me. This wish arose without the smallest settled thought of anything that could result from it. The greatest service I did my benefactress was in bringing into order the extensive forests which belonged to her in this precious property, whose value, time, and circumstances were continually increasing. Matters still went on according to the old route, and without regularity, without plan, no end to theft and fraud. Many hills were standing bare, and equal growth was nowhere to be found. But in the oldest cuttings, I personally visited the whole of them with an experienced forester. I got the woods correctly measured. I set men to hew, to sow, to plant in a short time. All things were in progress, that I might mount more readily on horseback, and also walk on foot with less obstruction. I had a suit of men's clothes made for me. I was present in many places. I was feared in all. Hearing that our young friends with Lothario were purposing to have another hunt, it came into my head for the first time in my life to make a figure, or that I may not do myself injustice, to pass in the eyes of this noble gentleman for what I was. I put on my men's clothes, took my gun upon my shoulder, and went forward with our hunters to await the party on our marches. They came. Lothario did not know me, a nephew of the lady, introduced me to him as a clever forester, joked about my youth, and carried on his jesting in my praise, till at last Lothario recognized me. The nephew seconded my project. As if we had concocted it together, he circumstantially and gratefully described what I had done for the estates of his aunt, and consequently for himself. Lothario listened with attention. He talked with me, inquired concerning all particulars of the estates and district. I, of course, was glad to have such an opportunity of showing him my knowledge. I stood my ordeal very well. I submitted certain projects of improvement to him, which he sanctioned, telling me of similar examples and strengthening my arguments by the connection which he gave them. My satisfaction grew more perfect every moment. Happily, however, I merely wished that he should be acquainted with me, not that he should love me. We came home, and I observed more clearly than before that the attention he showed Lydia seemed expressive of a secret attachment. I had reached my object, yet I was not at rest from that day. He showed a true respect for me, a fine trust in me in company. He usually spoke to me, asked my opinion, and appeared to be persuaded that in household matters nothing was unknown to me. His sympathy excited me extremely, even when the conversation was of general finance and political economy. He used to lead me to take part in it, and in his absence, I endeavored to acquire more knowledge of our province, nay, of all the empire. The task was easy for me. It was but repeating on the great scale what I knew so accurately on the small. From this period, he visited our house oftener. We talked, I may say, of everything, yet in some degree our conversation always in the end grew economical, if even but in a secondary sense. What immense affects a man by the continuous application of his powers, his time, his money, even by means which seem but small, may bring about, was frequently and largely spoken of. I did not withstand the tendency which drew me towards him, and alas, I felt too soon how deep, how cordial, how pure and genuine was my love, as I believed it more and more apparent that Lydia, and not myself, was the occasion of these visits. She, at least, was most vividly persuaded, so she made me her confidant, and this again, in some degree, consoled me, for, in truth, what she explained so much to her advantage, I reckoned nowise of importance. There was not a trace of any serious, lasting union being meditated, but the more distinctly did I see the wish of the impassioned girl to be his at any price. Thus did matters stand when the lady of the house surprised me with an unexpected message. Lothario said she offers you his hand and desires through life to have you ever at his side. She enlarged upon my qualities, and told me what I liked sufficiently to hear, that in me Lothario was persuaded he had found the person whom he had so long been seeking for. The height of happiness was now attained for me. My hand was asked by a man for whom I had the greatest value, beside whom, and along with whom, I might expect a full, expanded, free, and profitable employment of my inborn tendency, of my talent. Perfected by practice, the sum of my existence seemed to have enlarged itself into infinitude. I gave my consent. He himself came and spoke with me in private. He held out his hand to me. He looked into my eyes, he clasped me in his arms, and pressed a kiss upon my lips. It was the first and the last he confided to me. All his circumstances told me how much his American campaign had cost him, what debts he had accumulated on his property, that on this score, he had in some measure quarreled with his granduncle, that the worthy gentleman intended to relieve him, though truly in his own peculiar way being minded to provide him with a rich wife, whereas a man of sense would choose a household wife at all events, that however by his sister's influence, he hoped his noble relative would be persuaded he set before me the condition of his fortune, his plans, his prospects, and requested my cooperation till his uncle should consent. Our promise was to be a secret. Scarcely was he gone, when Lydia asked me whether he had spoken of her. I answered no, and tired her with a long detail of economical affairs. She was restless out of humor, and his conduct, when he came again, did not improve her situation. But the sun, I see, is bending to the place of rest. Well for you, my friend, you would otherwise have had to hear this story, which I often enough go over by myself, in all its most minute particulars. Let me hasten, we are coming to an epoch on which it is not good to linger. By Lothario I was made acquainted with his noble sister, and she at a convenient time contrived to introduce me to the uncle. I gained the old man, he consented to our wishes, and I returned with happy tidings to my benefactress. The affair was now no secret in the house. Lydia heard of it. She thought the thing impossible, when she could no longer doubt of it. She vanished all at once, we knew not whither she had gone. Our marriage day was coming near. I had often asked him for his portrait, just as he was going off. I reminded him that he had promised it. He said, "You have never given me the case, you want to have it fitted into this." Was true, I had got a present from a female friend, on which I set no ordinary value. Her name, worked from her own hair, was fastened on the outer glass. Within there was a vacant piece of ivory, on which her portrait was to have been painted. When a sudden death snatched her from me, Lothario's love had cheered me at the time her death lay heavy on my spirits, and I wished to have the void which she had left me in her present filled by the picture of my friend. I ran to my chamber, fetched my jewel box, and opened it in his presence. Scarcely had he looked into it when he noticed a medallion with the portrait of a lady. He took it in his hand, considered it attentively, and asked me hastily whose face it was. My mother's, answered. Roman one, I could have sworn, said he, that it was the portrait of a Madame Saint Alban, whom I met some years ago in Switzerland. It is the same, replied I, smiling. And so you have unwittingly become acquainted with your stepmother. Saint Alban is the name my mother has assumed for traveling with. She passes under it in France at present. I am the miserablest man alive, exclaimed he, as he threw the portrait back into the box, covered his eyes with his hand, and hurried from the room. He sprang on horseback. I ran to the balcony, and called out after him. He turned, waved his hand to me, went speedily away, and I have never seen him more. The sun went down. Teresa gazed with unaverted looks upon the splendor, and both her fine eyes filled with tears. Teresa spoke not. She laid her hand upon her new friend's hands. He kissed it with emotion. She dried her tears, and rose. Let us return, and see that all is right, said she. The conversation was not lively. By the way, they entered the garden door, and noticed Lydia sitting on a bench. She rose, withdrew before them, and walked in. She had a paper in her hand. Two little girls were by her. I see, observed Teresa, she is still carrying her only comfort, Lothario's letter, with her. He promises that she shall live with him again, so soon as he is well. He begs of her, till then, to stay in peace with me. On these words she hangs. With these lines she solaces herself, but with his friends she is extremely angry. Meanwhile the two children had approached. They courtesied to Teresa, and gave her an account of all that had occurred while she was absent. You see here another part of my employment, said Teresa, Lothario's sister, and I have made a league. We educate some little ones in common, such as promise to be lively, serviceable housewives. I take charge of she of such as show a finer and more quiet talent. It is right to provide for the happiness of future husbands, both in household and in intellectual matters. When you become acquainted with my noble friend, a new era in your life will open. Her beauty, her goodness, make her worthy of the reverence of the world. Wilhelm did not venture to confess that, unhappily, the lovely countess was already known to him, that his transient connection with her would occasion him perpetual sorrow. He was well pleased that Teresa let the conversation drop, that some business called for her within. He was now alone. The intelligence which he had just received of the young and lovely countess being driven to replace, by deeds of benevolence, her own lost comfort, made him very sad. He felt that, with her, it was but a need of self-oblivion and attempt to supply. By the hopes of happiness to others the want of a cheerful enjoyment of existence in herself, he thought Teresa happy, since even in that unexpected melancholy alteration, which had taken place in her prospects, there was no alteration needed in herself. How fortunate beyond all others cried, he is the man who, in order to adjust himself to fate, is not required to cast away his whole preceding life. Teresa came into his room and begged pardon for disturbing him. My whole library, said she, is in the wall press here. They are rather books which I do not throw aside, than which I have taken up. Lydia wants a pious book. There are one or two of that sort among them, persons who throughout the whole 12 months are worldly, think it necessary to be godly at a time of straits. All moral and religious matters they regard as physic, which is to be taken with aversion when they are unwell. In a clergyman, a moralist, they see nothing but a doctor whom they cannot soon enough get rid of. Now, I confess I look upon religion as a kind of diet, which can only be so when I make a constant practice of it, when throughout the whole 12 months I never lose it out of sight. She searched among the books. She found some edifying works, as they are called. It was of my mother, said Teresa, that poor Lydia learned to have recourse to books like these, while her gallant continued faithful. Plays and novels were her life. His departure brought religious writings once more into credit. I for my share cannot understand, continued she, how men have made themselves believe that God speaks to us through books and histories, the man to whom the universe does not reveal directly what relation it has to him, whose heart does not tell him what he owes to himself, and others that man will scarcely learn it out of books which generally do little more than give our errors names. She left our friend alone. He passed his evening in examining the little library. It had in truth been gathered quite at random. Teresa, for the few days Wilhelm spent with her, continued still the same. She related to him, at different times, the consequences of that singular incident with great minuteness. Day and hour, place and name were present to her memory. We shall here compress into a word or two so much of it as will be necessary for the information of our readers. The reason of Lothario's quick departure was unhappily too easy to explain. He had met Teresa's mother on her journey. Her charms attracted him. She was no niggard of them, and this luckless transitory aberration came at length to shut him out from being united to a lady whom nature seemed to have expressly made for him. As for Teresa, she continued in the circle of her duties. They learned that Lydia had been living in the neighborhood in secret. She was happy that the marriage, though for unknown causes, had not been completed. She endeavored to renew her intimacy with Lothario, and more as it seemed out of desperation than affection, by surprise, than with consideration from tedium than of purpose, he had met her wishes. Teresa was not uneasy on this account. She waived all further claims, and if he had even been her husband, she would probably have had sufficient spirit to endure a matter of this kind, if it had not troubled her domestic order at least. She often used to say that a wife who properly conducted her economy should take no umbrage at such little fancies of her husband, but be always certain that he would return. Ere long, Teresa's mother had deranged her fortune. The losses fell upon the daughter, whose share of the effects, in consequence, was small. The old lady, who had been Teresa's benefactress, died, leaving her a little property in land, and a handsome sum by way of legacy. Teresa soon contrived to make herself at home in this new narrow circle. Lothario offered her a better property, Jarno, endeavoring to negotiate the business. But she refused it. I will show, said she, in this little, that I deserve to share the great with him. But I keep this before me, that should accident embarrass me on my own account, or that of others, I will betake myself without the smallest hesitation to my generous friend. There is nothing less liable to be concealed and unemployed than well-directed practical activity. Scarcely had she settled in her little property, when her acquaintance and advice began to be desired by many of her neighbors, and the proprietor of the adjacent lands gave her plainly enough to understand that it depended on herself alone whether she would take his hand and be heiress of the greater part of his estates. She had already mentioned the matter to our friend. She often jested with him about marriages suitable and unsuitable. Nothing, said she, once gives a greater loose to people's tongues than when a marriage happens which they can denominate unsuitable. And yet the unsuitable are far more common than the suitable, for alas, with most marriages, it is not long till things assume a very piteous look. The confusion of ranks by marriage can be called unsuitable only when the one party is unable to participate in the manner of existence which is native habitual, and which at length grows absolutely necessary to the other. The different classes have different ways of living which they cannot change or communicate to one another. And this is the reason why connections such as these in general were better not be formed, yet exceptions and exceptions of the happiest kind are possible. Thus, too, the marriage of a young woman with a man advanced in life is generally unsuitable, yet I have seen some such turn out extremely well for me, I know, but of one kind of marriage that would be entirely unsuitable, that, in which I should be called upon to make a show and manage ceremonies, I would rather give my hand to the son of any honest farmer in the neighborhood. Wilhelm at length made ready for returning. He requested of Teresa to obtain for him a parting word with Lydia. The impassioned girl at last consented. He said some kindly things to her, to which she answered, "The first burst of anguish I have conquered. Lothario will be ever dear to me, but for those friends of his, I know them, and it grieves me that they are about him. The abbe for a whim's sake could leave a person in extreme need, or even plunge one into it. The doctor would have all things go on like clockwork. Jarno has no heart, and you at least no force of character. Just go on, let these three people use you as their tool. They will have many an execution to commit to you for a long time, as I know well my presence has been hateful to them. I had not found out their secret, but I had observed that they had one. Why these bolted rooms, these strange passages? Why can no one ever reach the central tower? Why did they banish me, whenever they could, to my own chamber? I will confess jealousy at first incited me to these discoveries. I feared some lucky rival might be hid there. I have now laid aside that suspicion. I am well convinced that Lothario loves me, that he means honorably by me, but I am quite as well convinced that his false and artful friends betray him. If you would really do him service, if you would ever be forgiven for the injury which I have suffered from you, free him from the hands of these men. But what am I expecting? Give this letter to him, repeat what it contains, that I will love him forever, that I depend upon his word." Ah, cried she, rising and throwing herself with tears upon Teresa's neck. "He is surrounded by my foes. They will endeavor to persuade him that I have sacrificed nothing for his sake. O Lothario may well believe that he is worthy of any sacrifice, without needing to be grateful for it." Wilhelm's parting with Teresa was more cheerful. She wished they might soon meet again. "Me, you wholly know," said she. "I alone have talked. While we have been together, it will be your duty next time to repay my candor." During his return, he kept contemplating this new and bright phenomenon. With the liveliest recollection, what confidence had she inspired him with? He thought of Mignon and Felix, and how happy they might be if under her direction. Then he thought of himself, and felt what pleasure it would be to live beside a being so entirely serene and clear. As he approached Lothario's castle, he observed with more than usual interest the central tower, and the many passages and side buildings. He resolved to question Jarno or the abbe on the subject by the earliest opportunity. Chapter Romans 7. On arriving at the castle, Wilhelm found its noble owner in the way of full recovery. The doctor and the abbe had gone off. Jarno alone was there. It was not long till the patient now and then could ride, sometimes by himself, sometimes with his friends. His conversation was at once courteous and earnest, instructive and enlivening. You could often notice in it traces of a tender sensibility, although he strove to hide it, and almost seemed to blame it when, in spite of him, it came to view. One evening, while at table, he was silent, though his look was very cheerful. "Today," said Jarno, "you have met with an adventure, and no doubt you relished it." "I give you credit for your penetration," said Lothario. "Yes, I have met with a very pleasing adventure. At another time, perhaps, I should not have considered it so charming as today when it came upon me, so attractively towards night. I rode out beyond the river through the hamlets, by a path which I had often visited in former years. My bodily ailings must have reduced me more than I supposed. I felt weak, but as my strength was reawakening, I was as it were newborn. All objects seemed to wear the hues they had in earlier times. All looked graceful, lovely, charming. As they have not looked to me for many years, I easily observed that it was mere debility. Yet I continued to enjoy it. I rode softly onwards, and could now conceive how men may grow to like diseases which attune us to those sweet emotions. You know perhaps what used of old so frequently to lead me that way." "If I mistake not," answered Jarno, "it was a little love concern you were engaged in with a farmer's daughter." "It might be called a great one," said Lothario, "for we loved each other deeply seriously. And for a long time today it happened everything combined to represent before me in its liveliest color the earliest season of our love. The boys were again shaking maybugs from the trees. The ashen grove had not grown larger since the day I saw her first. It was now long since I had met with Margaret. She is married at a distance, and I had heard by chance that she was come with her children some weeks ago to pay a visit to her father. This ride, then, was not altogether accidental. "I will not deny," replied Lothario, "that I wished to meet her. On coming near the house, I saw her father sitting at the door, A child of probably a year old was standing by him. As I approached, a female gave a hasty look from an upper window, and a minute afterwards, I heard some person tripping downstairs. I thought surely it was she, and I will confess I was flattering myself that she had recognized me and was hastening to meet me, but what was my surprise and disappointment when she bounded from the door, seized the child to whom the horses had come pretty close, and took it in. It gave me a painful twinge. My vanity, however, was a little solaced when I thought I saw a tint of redness on her neck and on the ear which were uncovered. I drew up and while speaking with the father glanced sideways over all the windows to observe if she would not appear at some of them, but no trace of her was visible. I would not, so I rode away. My displeasure was a little mollified by wonder, though I had not seen the face. It appeared to me that she was scarcely changed, and 10 years are a pretty space. Nay, she looked even younger, quite as slim, as light of foot. Her neck, if possible, was lovelier than before, her cheeks as quick at blushing. Yet she was the mother of 6 children, perhaps. Of more, this apparition suited the enchantment which surrounded me so well that I rode along with feelings grown still younger. And I did not turn till I was at the forest when the sun was going down strongly as the falling dew, and the prescription of our doctor called upon me to proceed direct homewards. I could not help again going round by the farmhouse. I observed a woman walking up and down the garden, which is fenced by a light hedge. I rode along the footpath to it, and found myself at no great distance from the person whom I wanted. Though the evening sun was glancing in my eyes, I saw that she was busy with the hedge which only slightly covered her. I thought I recognized my mistress on coming up. I halted not without a palpitation at the heart. Some high twigs of wild roses, which a soft air was blowing to and fro, made her figure indistinct to me. I spoke to her, asked her how she was. She answered in an undertone, "Quite well." In the meantime, I perceived a child behind the hedge engaged in plucking roses, and I took the opportunity of asking where her other children were. "It is not my child," said she, "that were rather early." And at this moment it happened that the twigs were blown aside, and her face could be distinctly seen. I knew not what to make of the affair. It was my mistress, and it was not almost younger, almost lovelier than she used to be 10 years before. "Are not you the farmer's daughter?" inquired I, half confused. "No," said she, "I am her cousin." "You resemble one another wonderfully," added Roman. "One, yes, so says every one that knew her half a score of years ago." I continued putting various questions to her. My mistake was pleasant to me, even after I had found it out. I could not leave this living image of bygone blessedness that stood before me. The child meanwhile had gone away. It had wandered to the pond in search of flowers. She took her leave and hastened after it. I had now, however, learned that my former love was really in her father's house. While riding forward, I employed myself in guessing whether it had been her cousin or she that had secured the child from harm. I more than once in thought repeated all the circumstances of the incident. I can remember few things that have affected me more gratefully. But I feel that I am still unwell. We must ask the doctor to deliver us from the remains of this pathetic humor. With confidential narratives of pretty love adventures, it often happens, as with ghost stories, when the first is told, the others follow of themselves. Our little party, in recalling other times, found numerous passages of this description. Lothario had the most to tell. Jarno's histories were all of one peculiar character. What Wilhelm could disclose we already know. He was apprehensive they might mention his adventure with the Countess, but it was not hinted at, not even in the remotest manner. "It is true," observed Lothario, "there can scarcely any feeling in the world be more agreeable than when the heart, after a pause of indifference, again opens to love for some new object. Yet I would forever have renounced that happiness had fate been pleased to unite me with Teresa. We are not always youths, we ought not always to be children. To the man who knows the world, who understands what he should do in it, what he should hope from it, nothing can be more desirable than meeting with a wife who will everywhere cooperate with him, who will everywhere prepare his way for him, whose diligence takes up what his must leave, whose occupation spreads itself on every side, while his must travel forward on its single path. What a heaven had I figured for myself beside Teresa, not the heaven of an enthusiastic bliss, but of a sure life on earth, order in prosperity, courage in adversity, care for the smallest, and a spirit capable of comprehending and managing the greatest. Oh, I saw in her the qualities which, when developed, make such women as we find in history, whose excellence appears to us far preferable to that of Menthai's clearness of view, this expertness in all emergencies, this sureness in details which brings the whole so accurately out, although they never seem to think of it. You may well forgive me," added he, and turning to Wilhelm with a smile, "that I forsook Aurelia for Teresa. With the one I could expect a calm and cheerful life, with the other not a happy hour. I will confess, said Wilhelm, that in coming hither I had no small anger in my heart against you, that I proposed to censure with severity your conduct to Aurelia. It was really censurable, said Lothario. I should not have exchanged my friendship for her. With the sentiment of love, I should not, in place of the respect which she deserved, have intruded an attachment. She was neither calculated to excite nor to maintain a lass. She was not lovely, when she loved the greatest misery that can befall a woman. Well, it is past, said Wilhelm. We cannot always shun the things we blame in spite of us. Our feelings and our actions sometimes strangely swerve from their natural and right direction. Yet there are certain duties which we never should lose sight of. Peace be to the ashes of our friend, without censuring ourselves, or her, let us with sympathizing hearts strew flowers upon her grave. But at the grave in which the hapless mother sleeps, let me ask, why you acknowledge not the childless son, whom any father might rejoice in, and whom you appear entirely to overlook with your pure and tender nature? How can you altogether cast away the instinct of a parent? All this while, you have not spent one syllable upon that precious creature, of whose attractions I could say so much. Whom do you speak of? Asked Lothario. I do not understand you. Of whom but of your son, Aurelia's son, the lovely child to whose good fortune there is nothing wanting, but that a tender father should acknowledge and receive him. You mistake, my friend, exclaimed Lothario. Aurelia never had a son, at least by me. I know of no child, or I would with joy acknowledge it. And even in the present case, I will gladly look upon the little creature as a relic of her, and take charge of educating it. But did she ever give you to believe that the boy was hers, was mine? I cannot recollect that I ever heard a word from her expressly on the subject, but we took it up so, and I never for a moment doubted it. I can give you something like a clue to this perplexity, said Jarno. An old woman, whom you must have noticed, often gave Aurelia the child. She accepted it, with passion, hoping to alleviate her sorrows by its presence, and in truth it gave her many a comfortable hour. This discovery awoke anxieties in Wilhelm. He thought of his dear Mignon and his beautiful Felix with the liveliest distinctness. He expressed his wish to remove them both from the state in which they were. We shall soon arrange it, said Lothario. The little girl may be committed to Teresa. She cannot be in better hands. As for the boy, I think you should yourself take charge of him. What in us the women leave uncultivated children cultivate when we retain them near us. But first, I think, said Jarno, you will once for all renounce the stage, as you have no talent for it. Our friend was struck. He had to curb himself, for Jarno's harsh sentence had not a little wounded his self-love. If you convince me of that, replied he, forcing a smile, you will do me a service, though it is but a mournful service to rouse one from a pleasing dream. Without enlarging on the subject, answered Jarno, I could merely wish you would go and fetch the children. The rest will come in course. I am ready, answered Wilhelm. I am restless and curious to see if I can get no further knowledge of the boy. I long to see the little girl who has attached herself so strangely to me. It was agreed that he should lose no time in setting out. Next day, he had prepared himself. His horse was saddled. He only waited for Lothario to take leave of him at the dinner hour. They went as usual to table, not waiting for the master of the house. He did not come till late, and then sat down by them. I could bet, said Jarno, that today you have again been making trial of your tenderness of heart. You have not been able to withstand the curiosity to see your quondam love. Guest, replied Lothario. Let us hear, said Jarno, how it went. I long to know. I confess, replied Lothario, the affair lay nearer my heart than it reasonably ought, so I formed the resolution of again riding out, and actually seeing the person whose renewed young image had affected me with such a pleasing illusion. I alighted at some distance from the house, and sent the horses to a side that the children who were playing at the door might not be disturbed. I entered the house by chance. She met me just within the threshold. It was herself, and I recognized her. Notwithstanding the striking change, she had grown stouter, and seemed to be larger. Her gracefulness was shaded by a look of staidness. Her vivacity had passed into a calm reflectiveness. Her head, which she once bore so airily and freely drooped a little, slight furrows had been traced upon her brow. She cast down her eyes on seeing me, but no blush announced any inward movement of the heart. I held out my hand to her. She gave me hers. I inquired about her husband. He was absent. About her children. She stepped out and called them. All came in and gathered round her. Nothing is more charming than to see a mother with a child upon her arm. Nothing is more reverend than a mother among many children. That I might say something, I asked the name of the youngest. She desired me to walk in and see her father. I agreed, She introduced me to the room, where everything was standing almost just as I had left it. And what seemed stranger still, the fair cousin, her living image, was sitting on the very seat behind the spinning wheel, where I had found my love so often in the self-same form. A little girl, the very figure of her mother, had come after us, and thus I stood in the most curious scene between the future and the past, as in a grove of oranges, where within a little circle flowers and fruits are living in successive stages of their growth. Beside each other the cousin went away to fetch us some refreshment. I gave the woman I had loved so much my hand, and said to her, I feel a true joy in seeing you again. You are very good to say. So answered she, but I also can assure you, I feel the highest joy. How often have I wished to see you once more in my life? I have wished it in moments which I regarded as my last. She said this, with a settled voice, without appearance of emotion, with that natural air, which of old delighted me so much. The cousin returned the father with her, and I leave you to conceive with what feelings I remained, and with what I came away. Chapter Roman 8. In his journey to the town, our friend was thinking of the lovely women whom he knew, or had heard of their curious fortunes, which contained so little happiness, were present to him. With a sad distinctness, cried he, poor Mariana, what shall I yet learn of thee, and thou noble Amazon, glorious protecting spirit, to whom I owe so much, whom I everywhere expect to meet, and nowhere see? In what mournful circumstances may I find thee, shouldst thou again appear before me? On his arrival in the town, there was not one of his acquaintances at home. He hastened to the theater. He supposed they would be rehearsing here. However, all was still. The house seemed empty. One little door alone was open. Passing through it to the stage, he found Aurelia's ancient serving maid employed in sewing linen for a new decoration. There was barely light enough to let her work. Felix and Mignon were sitting by her on the floor. They had a book between them, and while Mignon read aloud, Felix was repeating all the words, as if he too knew his letters, if he too could read. The children started up and ran to him. He embraced them with the tenderest feelings, and brought them closer to the woman. Art thou the person, said he to her, with an earnest voice, from whom Aurelia received this child? She looked up from her work, and turned her face to him. He saw her in full light. He started back in terror. It was old Barbara. Where is Mariana? Cried he. Far from here, replied the crone. And Felix is the son of that unhappy and too true and tender-hearted girl. May you never feel what you have made us suffer. May the treasure, which I now deliver you, make you as happy as he made us wretched. She arose to go away. Wilhelm held her fast. I mean, not to escape, you said. She, let me fetch a paper that will make you glad and sorrowful. She retired, and Wilhelm gazed upon the child with a painful joy. He durst not reckon him his own. He is thine, cried Mignon. He is thine, and passed the child to Wilhelm's knee. Barbara came back and handed him a letter. Here are Mariana's last words, said she. She is dead, cried he. Dead, said the old woman. I wish to spare you all reproaches. Astonished and confounded, Wilhelm broke up the letter, but scarcely had he read the first words of it when a bitter grief took hold of him. He let the letter fall, and sank upon a seat. Mignon hurried to him, trying to console him. In the meantime, Felix had picked up the letter. He teased his playmate, till she yielded, till she knelt beside him, and read it over. Felix repeated the words, and Wilhelm was compelled to hear them twice. If this sheet should ever reach thee, then lament thy ill-starred friend. Thy love has caused her death. The boy, whose birth I survive but a few days, is then I die faithful to thee much, as appearances may be against me. With thee I lost everything that bound me to life. I die content, for they have assured me that the child is healthy, and will live. Listen to old Barbara. Forgive her. Farewell, and forget me not. What a painful, and yet to his comfort, half enigmatic letter. Its contents pierced through his heart, as the children, stuttering and stammering, pronounced and repeated them. That's what has come of it, said the crone, not waiting till he had recovered. Thank heaven that, having lost so true a love, you have still left you so fine a child. Your grief will be unequaled when you learn how the poor good girl stood faithful to you to the end, how miserable she became, and what she sacrificed for your sake. Let me drain the cup of sorrow and of joy at once, cried Wilhelm. Convince me, even persuade me, that she was a good girl, that she deserved respect as well as love. Then leave me to my grief for her irreparable loss. It is not yet time, said Barbara. I have work to do, and I would not we were seen together. Let it be a secret that Felix is your son. I should have too much abuse to suffer from the company, for having formerly deceived them. Mignon will not betray us. She is good and close. I have known it long, and I said nothing, answered Mignon. How is it possible? Cried Barbara. Whence? Cried Wilhelm. The spirit told it me. Where? In the vault. When the old man drew his knife, It called to me, bring his father, and I thought it must be thou. Who called to thee? I know not, in my heart, in my head, I was terrified, I trembled, I prayed. Then it called, and I understood it. Wilhelm pressed her to his heart, recommended Felix to her, and retired. He had not observed, till then, that she was grown much paler and thinner than when he left her. Madame Melina was the first acquaintance he met. She received him in the friendliest manner. Oh, that you might find everything among us as you wished, exclaimed she. I doubt it, answered Wilhelm. I do not expect it, confess that they have taken all their measures to dispense with me. Why would you go away? Replied his friend. We cannot soon enough convince ourselves, said he, how very simply we may be dispensed with in the world, what important personages we conceive ourselves to be. We think that it is we alone who animate the circle we move in, that, in our absence, life, nourishment, and breath will make a general pause. And alas, the void which occurs is scarcely remarked. So soon is it filled up again, nay, it is often but the place, if not for something better, at least for something more agreeable. And the sorrows of our friends we are not to take into account. For our friends, too, it is well when they soon recover their composure, when they say each to himself, there where thou art there, where thou remainest accomplish what thou canst, be busy, be courteous, and let the present scene delight thee. On a narrower inquiry, he found what he had looked for. The opera had been set up, and was exclusively attracting the attention of the public. His parts had in the mean while been distributed between Horatio and Laertes, and both of them were in the habit of eliciting from the spectators far more liberal applause than he had ever been enabled to obtain. Laertes entered, and Madame Melina cried, look you here at this lucky fellow. He is soon to be a capitalist, or heaven knows what. Wilhelm, in embracing him, discovered that his coat was superfine, the rest of his apparel was simple, but of the very best materials. Solve me the riddle, cried our friend. You are still in time to learn, replied Laertes, that my running to and fro is now about to be repaid, that a partner in a large commercial house is turning to advantage my acquirements from books or observation, and allowing me a share with him. I would give something could I purchase back my confidence in women. There is a pretty niece in the house, and I see well enough that if I pleased I might soon be a made man. You have not heard, said Frau Melina, that a marriage has already taken place among ourselves. Serlo is actually wedded to the fair Elmira. Her father would not tolerate their secret correspondence. They talked in this manner about many things that had occurred while he was absent, nor was it difficult for him to observe that, according to the present temper and constitution of the company, his dismissal had already taken place. He impatiently expected Barbara, who had appointed him to wait for her far in the night. She was to come when all were sleeping. She required as many preparations as if she had been the youngest maiden gliding in to her beloved. Meanwhile, he read 100 times the letter she had given him, read with unspeakable delight the word faithful in the hand of his darling, with horror the announcement of her death, whose approaches she appeared to view unmoved. Midnight was past when something rustled at the half-opened door, and Barbara came in with a little basket. I am to tell you the story of our woes, said she, and I must believe that you will sit unmoved at the recital that you are waiting for me, but to satisfy your curiosity, that you will now, as you did formerly, retire within your cold selfishness while our hearts are breaking. But look you here, thus on that happy evening did I bring you the bottle of champagne, thus did I place the 3 glasses on the table, and as you then began with soft nursery tales to cozen us and lull us asleep, so will I now with stern truths instruct you and keep you waking. Wilhelm knew not what to say when the old woman in fact let go the cork and filled the 3 glasses to the brim. Drink, cried she, having emptied at a draught her foaming glass. Drink, ere the spirit of it pass. This 3rd glass shall froth away, untasted, to the memory of my unhappy Mariana. How red were her lips when she then drank your health, ah, and now forever pale and cold. Sibyl Fury, cried Wilhelm, springing up and striking the table with his fist, what evil spirit possesses thee, and drives thee? For what dost thou take me, that thou thinkest the simplest narrative of Mariana's death and sorrows will not harrow me enough, but usest these hellish arts to sharpen my torment? If thy insatiable greediness is such that thou must revel at the funeraltable drink, and speak, I have loathed thee from of old, and I cannot reckon Mariana guiltless, while I even look upon thee her companion. Softly, mane hair, replied the crone, you shall not ruffle me. Your debts to us are deep and dark. The railing of a debtor does not anger one. But you are right, the simplest narrative will punish you sufficiently here. Then the struggle and the victory of Mariana, striving to continue yours. Continue mine, cried Wilhelm. What fable dost thou mean to tell me? Interrupt me not, said she, hear me, and then give what belief you list to me. It is all one, did you not the last night you were with us find a letter in the room, and take it with you? I found the letter after I had taken it with me. It was lying in the neckerchief, which in the warmth of my love I had seized and carried off. What did the sheet contain? The expectation of an angry lover to be better treated on the next than he had been on the preceding evening, and that you kept your word to him. I need not be told, for I saw him with my own eyes, gliding from your house before daybreak. You may have seen him, but what occurred within, how sadly Mariana passed that night, how fretfully I passed it, you are yet to learn. I will be altogether candid. I will neither hide nor palliate the fact that I persuaded Mariana to yield to the solicitations of a certain Norberg. It was with repugnance that she followed my advice, nay, that she even heard it. He was rich, he seemed attached, I hoped he would be constant soon, after he was forced to go upon his journey, and Mariana became acquainted with you. What had I then to abide, what to hinder, what to undergo? O cried, she, often hadst thou spared my youth, my innocence. But 4 short weeks, I might have found a worthy object of my love. I had then been worthy of him, and love might have given with a quiet conscience what now I have sold against my. Will she entirely abandon herself to her affection? For you I need not ask if you were happy over her understanding. I had an unbounded power, for I knew the means of satisfying all her little inclinations, but over her heart I had no control, for she never sanctioned what I did for her, what I counseled her to do when her heart said nay. It was only to irresistible necessity that she would yield, but ere long the necessity appeared to her extremely pressing. In the first period of her youth, she had never known want. By a complication of misfortunes, her people lost their fortune. The poor girl had been used to have a number of conveniences, and upon her young spirit certain principles of honor had been stamped, which made her restless without much helping her. She had not the smallest skill in worldly matters. She was innocent in the strictest meaning of the word. She had no idea that one could buy without paying. Nothing frightened her more than being in debt. She always rather liked to give than take this, and this alone was what made it possible that she could be constrained to give herself away in order to get rid of various little debts which weighed upon her. And couldst not thou, cried Wilhelm in an angry tone, have saved her? Oh yes, replied the beldame, with hunger and need, with sorrow and privation, but for this I was not disposed. Abominable base procuress, so thou hast sacrificed the hapless creature, offered her up to thy throat, to thy insatiable maw. It were better to compose yourself, and cease your reviling, said the dame. If you will revile, go to your high noble houses. There you will meet with many a mother full of anxious cares, to find out for some lovely heavenly maiden, the most odious of men, provided he be the richest. See the poor creature shivering and faltering before her fate, and nowhere finding consolation, till some more experienced female lets her understand that by marriage she acquires the right in future to dispose of her heart and person as she pleases. Peace, cried Wilhelm, dost thou think that one crime can be the excuse of another to thy story, without further observations? Do you listen then without blaming? Mariana became yours against my will. In this adventure, at least, I have nothing to reproach myself with. Norberg returned, he made haste to visit Mariana. She received him coldly, and angrily would not even admit him to a kiss. I employed all my art in apologizing for her conduct, gave him to understand that her confessor had awakened her conscience, that so long as conscientious scruples lasted, one was bound to respect them. I at last so far succeeded that he went away, I promising to do my utmost for him. He was rich and rude, but there was a touch of goodness in him, and he loved Mariana without limit. He promised to be patient, and I labored with the greatest ardor not to try him too far. With Mariana I had a stubborn contest. I persuaded her, nay, I may call it forced her, by the threat of leaving her to write to Norberg and invite him for the night you came, and by chance picked up his answer in the neckerchief. Your presence broke my game, for scarcely were you gone when she anew began her lamentation. She swore she would not be unfaithful to you. She was so passionate, so frantic, that I could not help sincerely pitying her. In the end, I promised that for this night also I would pacify her lover, and send him off under some pretense or other. I entreated her to go to bed, but she did not seem to trust me. She kept on her clothes, and at last fell asleep without undressing, agitated and exhausted with weeping as she was. Norberg came, representing in the blackest hues her conscientious agonies and her repentance. I endeavored to retain him. He wished to see her, and I went into the room to prepare her. He followed me, and both of us at once came forward to her bed. She awoke, sprang wildly up, and tore herself from our arms. She conjured and begged, she entreated, threatened, and declared she would not yield. She was improvident enough to let fall some words about the true state of her affections, which poor Norberg had to understand in a spiritual sense at length he left her. And she locked her door. I kept him long with me and talked with him about her situation. I told him that she was with child, that poor girl, she should be humored. He was so delighted with his fatherhood, with his prospect of a boy, that he granted everything she wished. He promised rather to set out and travel for a time than vex his dear and injure her by these internal troubles. With such intentions at an early hour he glided out. And if you main hair stood sentry by our house, there was nothing wanting to your happiness, but to have looked into the bosom of your rival whom you thought so favored and so fortunate, and whose appearance drove you to despair. Art thou speaking truth? Said Wilhelm. True, said the crone, as I still hope to drive you to despair. Yes, certainly you would despair if I could rightly paint to you the following morning. How cheerfully did she awake, how kindly did she call me, and how warmly thank me, how cordially press me to her bosom. Now, said she, stepping up to her mirror with a smile, can I again take pleasure in myself and in my looks, since once more I am my own, am his, my one beloved friends. How sweet is it to conquer! How I thank thee for taking charge of me, for having turned thy prudence and thy understanding once at least to my advantage. Stand by me and devise the means of making me entirely happy. I assented, would not irritate her. I flattered her hopes, and she caressed me tenderly. If she retired but a moment from the window, I was made to stand and watch for you, of course. Would pass, for she at least would see you. Thus did we spend the restless day. At night, at the accustomed hour, we looked for you with certainty. I was already out waiting at the staircase. I grew weary and came into her again. With surprise, I found her in her military dress. She looked cheerful and charming beyond what I had ever seen her. Do I not deserve, said she, to appear tonight in man's apparel? Have I not struggled bravely? My dearest shall see me as he saw me for the first time. I will press him as tenderly and with greater freedom to my heart than then, for am I not his much more than I was then, when a noble resolution had not freed me? But, added she after pausing for a little, I have not yet entirely won him. I must still risk the uttermost in order to be worthy to be certain of possessing him. I must disclose the whole to him, discover to him all my state, then leave it to himself to keep or to reject me. This scene I am preparing for my friend, preparing for myself. And were his feelings capable of casting me away, I should then belong again entirely to myself. My punishment would bring me consolation. I would suffer all that fate could lay upon me. With such purposes and hopes, main hair, this lovely girl expected you. You came not. Oh, how shall I describe the state of watching and of hope? I see thee still before me. With what love, what heartfelt love thou spokest of the man whose cruelty thou hadst not yet experienced. Good dear Barbara, cried Wilhelm, springing up and seizing the old woman by the hand. We have had enough of mummery and preparation. Thy indifferent, thy calm, contented tone betrays thee. Give me back my Mariana. She is living, she is near at hand, not in vain. Didst thou choose this late lonely hour to visit me? Not in vain. Hast thou prepared me by thy most delicious narrative? Where is she? Where hast thou hidden her? I believe all. I will promise to believe also thou, but show her to me, so thou give her to my arms the shadow of her. I have seen already, let me clasp her once more to my bosom. I will kneel before her, I will entreat forgiveness. I will congratulate her upon her victory over herself. And the I will bring my Felix to her. Come, where hast thou concealed her? Leave her, leave me, no longer in uncertainty. Thy object is attained. Where hast thou hidden her? Let me light thee with this candle. Let me once more see her fair and kindly face. He had pulled old Barbara from her chair. She stared at him. Tears started into her eyes. Wild pangs of grief took hold of her. What luckless error, cried she, leaves you still a moment's hope? Yes, I have hidden her, but beneath the ground. Neither the light of the sun nor any social taper shall again illuminate her kindly face. Take the boy Felix to her grave and say to him, there lies thy mother whom thy father doomed. Unheard the heart of Mariana beats no longer with impatience to behold you, not in a neighboring chamber. Is she waiting the conclusion of my narrative or fable? The dark chamber has received her, to which no bridegroom follows, from which none comes to meet a lover. She cast herself upon the floor beside a chair, and wept bitterly. Wilhelm now, for the first time, felt entirely convinced that Mariana was no more his emotions. It is easy to conceive. The old woman rose. I have nothing more to tell you, cried she, and threw a packet on the table. Here are some writings that will put your cruelty to shame. Peruse these sheets with unwet eyes. If you can. She glided softly out. Our friend had not the heart to open the pocketbook that night. He had himself presented it to Mariana. He knew that she had carefully preserved in it every letter he had sent her. Next morning he prevailed upon himself. He untied the ribbon. Little notes came forward, written with pencil in his own hand, and recalled to him every situation from the first day of their graceful acquaintance to the last of their stern separation. In particular, it was not without acute anguish that he read a small series of billets which had been addressed to himself, and to which, as he saw from their tenor, Werner had refused admittance. No one of my letters has yet penetrated to thee, my entreaties. My prayers have not reached thee. Was it thyself that gave these cruel orders? Shall I never see thee more yet again? I attempt it. I entreat thee, come, O come. I ask not to retain thee if I might, but once more press thee to my heart. When I used to sit beside thee, holding thy hands, looking in thy eyes, and with the full heart of love and trust, to call thee dear, dear, good Wilhelm, it would please thee so that I had to repeat it over and over. I repeat it once again, dear, dear, good Wilhelm, be good as thou wert, come and leave me not to perish in my wretchedness. Thou regardest me as guilty, I am so, but not as thou thinkest. Come, let me have this single comfort, to be altogether known to thee. Let what will befall me afterwards. Not for my sake alone, for thy own too, I beg of thee to come. I feel the intolerable pains thou art suffering. Whilst thou fleest from me, come, that our separation may be less cruel perhaps. I was never worthy of thee till this moment, when thou art repelling me to boundless woe. By all that is holy, by all that can touch a human heart, I call upon thee. It involves the safety of a soul, it involves a life too, lives one of which must ever be dear to thee. This too, thy suspicion will discredit. Yet I will speak it in the hour of death. The child which I carry under my heart is thine. Since I began to love thee, no other man has even pressed my hand. Oh, that thy love, that thy uprightness had been the companions of my youth. Thou wilt not hear me, I must even be silent, but these letters will not die perhaps, they will speak to thee when the shroud is covering my lips, and the voice of thy repentance cannot reach my ear through my weary life to the last moment. This will be my only comfort, that though I cannot call myself blameless towards thee, I am free from blame. Wilhelm could proceed no farther. He resigned himself entirely to his sorrow, which became still more afflicting, when Lertz entering, he was obliged to hide his feelings. Lertz showed a purse of ducats, and began to count and reckon them, assuring Wilhelm that there could be nothing finer in the world than for a man to feel himself on the way to wealth, that nothing then could trouble or detain him. Wilhelm bethought him of his dream and smiled. But at the same time, he remembered with a shudder that in his vision, Mariana had forsaken him to follow his departed father, and that both of them at last had moved about the garden, hovering in the air like spirits. Lertz forced him from his meditations. He brought him to a coffee-house where immediately on Wilhelm's entrance several persons gathered round him. They were men who had applauded his performance on the stage. They expressed their joy at meeting him, lamenting that, as they had heard, he meant to leave the theater. They spoke so reasonably and kindly of himself and his acting, of his talent, and their hopes from it, that Wilhelm, not without emotion, cried at last, "Oh, how infinitely precious would such sympathy have been to me some months ago! How instructive, how encouraging! Never had I turned my mind so totally from the concerns of the stage. Never had I gone so far as to despair of the public." So far as this, said an elderly man, who now stepped forward, we should never go. The public is large. True judgment, true feeling, are not quite so rare, as one believes. Only the artist ought not to demand an unconditional approval of his work. Unconditional approval is always the least valuable conditional. You gentlemen are not content within life, as in art, I know. Well, a person must take counsel with himself when he purposes to do or to produce anything, but when it is produced or done, he must listen with attention to the voices of a number. And with a little practice out of these many votes, he will be able to collect a perfect judgment. The few who could well have saved us this trouble for the most part hold their peace. This they should not do, said Wilhelm. I have often heard people who themselves kept silence in regard to works of merit complain, and lament that silence was kept. Today then we will speak aloud, cried a young man. You must dine with us, and we will try to pay off a little of the debt which we have owed to you, and sometimes also to our good Aurelia. This invitation Wilhelm courteously declined. He went to Frau Melina, whom he wished to speak with on the subject of the children, as he meant to take them from her. Old Barbara's secret was not too religiously observed by him. He betrayed himself so soon as he again beheld the lovely Felix. Oh, my child, cried he, my dear child. He lifted him and pressed him to his heart. Father, what hast thou brought for me? Cried the child. Mignon looked at both, as if she meant to warn them not to blab. What new phenomenon is this? Said Frau Melina. They got the children sent away. And Wilhelm, thinking that he did not owe old Barbara the strictest secrecy, disclosed the whole affair to Frau Melina. She viewed him with a smile. Oh, these credulous men, exclaimed she, If anything is lying in their path, it is so easy to impose it on them. While in other cases, they will neither look to the right nor left, and can value nothing which they have not previously impressed with the stamp of an arbitrary passion. She sighed against her. Well, if our friend had not been altogether blind, he must have noticed in her conduct an affection for him, which had never been entirely subdued. He now spoke with her about the children, how he purposed to keep Felix with him, and to place Mignon in the country. Madame Melina, though sorry at the thought of parting with them, said the plan was good, nay, absolutely necessary. Felix was becoming wild with her, and Mignon seemed to need fresh air and other occupation. She was sickly, and was not yet recovering. Let it not mislead you, added Frau Melina, that I have lightly hinted doubts about the boys being really yours. The old woman, it is true, deserves but little confidence, yet a person who invents untruths for her advantage may likewise speak the truth when truths are profitable to her. Aurelia, she had hoodwinked to believe that Felix was Lothario's son, and it is a property of us women that we cordially like the children of our lovers, though we do not know the mothers, or even hate them from the heart. Felix came jumping in. She pressed him to her with a tenderness which was not usual to her. Wilhelm hastened home and sent for Barbara, who, however, would not undertake to meet him. Till the twilight he received her angrily. There is nothing in the world more shameful, said he, than establishing one's self on lies and fables. Already thou hast done much mischief with them, and now, when thy word could decide the fortune of my life, now must I stand dubious, not venturing to call the child my own, though to possess him without scruple would form my highest happiness. I cannot look upon the scandalous creature without hatred and contempt. Your conduct, if I speak with candor, said the old woman, appears to me intolerable, even if Felix were not yours. He is the fairest and the loveliest child in nature. One might purchase him, at any price, to have him always near one. Is he not worthy your acceptance? Do not I deserve for my care for the labor I have had with him a little pension for the small remainder of my life? Oh, you gentlemen, who know no want, it is well for you to talk of truth and honor. But how the miserable being whose smallest necessity is unprovided for, who sees in her perplexities no friend, no help, no counsel, how she is to press through the crowd of selfish men, and to starve in silence, you are seldom at the trouble to consider. Did you read Mariana's letters? They are the letters she wrote to you at that unhappy season. It was in vain that I attempted to approach you to deliver you these sheets. Your savage brother-in-law had so begirt you that craft and cunning were of no avail, and at last, when he began to threaten me and Mariana with imprisonment, I had then to cease my efforts and renounce all hope. Does not everything agree with what I told you? And does not Norberg's letter put the story altogether out of doubt? What letter? Asked he. Did you not find it in the pocketbook? Said Barbara. I have not yet read all of them. Give me the pocketbook on that paper. Everything depends. Norberg's luckless billet caused this sorrowful perplexity. Another from his hand may loose the knots, so far as aught may still depend upon unraveling them. She took a letter from the book. Wilhelm recognized that odious writing. He constrained himself and read. Tell me, girl, how hast thou got such power over me? I would not have believed that a goddess herself could make a sighing lover of me. Instead of hastening towards me with open arms, thou shrankest back from me. One might have taken it for aversion. Is it fair that I should spend the night with old Barbara sitting on a trunk, and but 2 doors between me and my pretty Mariana? It is too bad. I tell thee, I have promised to allow thee time to think, not to press thee unrelentingly. I could run mad at every wasted quarter of an hour. Have not I given thee gifts according to my power? Dost thou still doubt of my love? What wilt thou have do? But tell me, thou shalt want for nothing. Would the devil had the priest that put such stuff into thy head? Why didst thou go to such a churl? There are plenty of them that allow young people somewhat. In short, I tell thee, things must alter in 2 days. I must have an answer, for I am to leave the town. And if thou become not kind and friendly to me, thou shalt never see me more. In this style the letter spun itself to great length, turning to Wilhelm's painful satisfaction, still about the same point, and testifying for the truth of the account which he had got from Barbara. A second letter clearly proved that Mariana in the sequel also had maintained her purpose, and it was not without heartfelt grief that out of these and other papers Wilhelm learned the history of the unlucky girl to the very hour of her death. Barbara had gradually tamed rude, regardless Norberg by announcing to him Mariana's death, and leaving him in the belief that Felix was his son. Once or twice he had sent her money, which however she retained for herself, having talked Aurelia into taking charge of the child. But unhappily, this secret source of riches did not long endure. Norberg, by a life of riot, had impaired his fortune, and by repeated love affairs his heart was rendered callous to his supposed firstborn. Probable as all this seemed beautifully, as it all agreed, Wilhelm did not venture to give way to joy. He still appeared to dread a present coming from his evil genius. Your jealous fears, said Barbara, who guessed his mood of mind time alone, can cure look upon the child as a stranger one take stricter heed of him on that account, observe his gifts, his temper, his capacities. And if you do not buy and by discover in him, the exact resemblance of yourself, your eyes, must certainly be bad of this. I can assure you were I a man no one should foist a child on me, but it is a happiness for women that in these cases men are not so quick of sight. These things over Wilhelm and Barbara parted. He was to take Felix with him, she to carry Mignon to Teresa, and afterwards to live in any place. She pleased upon a small annuity which he engaged to settle on her. He sent for Mignon to prepare her for the new arrangement master, said she keep me with thee it will do me good, and do me Roman 99. He told her that as she was now grown up, there should be something further done for her instruction. I am sufficiently instructed, answered she, to love and grieve. He directed her attention to her health, and showed that she required continuous care and the direction of a good physician. Why care for me, said she, when there are so many things to care for? After he had labored greatly to persuade her that he could not take her with him, that he would conduct her to a place where he might often see her, she appeared as if she had not heard a word of it. Thou wishest not to have me with thee, said she. Perhaps it is better send me to the old harper. The poor man is lonely where he is. Wilhelm tried to show her that the old man was in comfortable circumstances. Every hour I long for him, replied the child. I did not see, said Wilhelm, that thou wert so fond of him when he was living with us. I was frightened for him when he was awake, I could not bear his eyes, but when he was asleep, I liked so well to sit by him. I used to chase the flies from him. I could not look at him enough. Oh, he has stood by me in fearful moments. None knows how much I owe him. Had I known the road, I should have run away to him already. Wilhelm set the circumstances in detail before her. He said that she had always been a reasonable child, and that on this occasion, also she might do as she desired. Reason is cruel, said she. The heart is better. I will go as thou requirest, only leave me Felix. After much discussion, her opinion was not altered, and Wilhelm at last resolved on giving Barbara both the children and sending them together to Teresa. This was the easier for him, as he still feared to look upon the lovely Felix as his son. He would take him on his arm and carry him about. The child delighted to be held before the glass. Wilhelm also liked, though unavowedly, to hold him there and seek resemblances between their faces. If for a moment any striking similarity appeared between them, he would press the boy in his arms, and then, at once affrighted by the thought that he might be mistaken, he would set him down and let him run away. Oh, cried he, if I were to appropriate this priceless treasure, and it were then to be snatched from me, I should be the most unhappy man on earth. The children had been sent away, and Wilhelm was about to take a formal leave of the theater, when he felt that in reality he had already taken leave and needed. But to go Mariana was no more. His two guardian spirits had departed, and his thoughts hied after them. The fair boy hovered like a beautiful, uncertain vision in the eyes of his imagination. He saw him at Teresa's hand, running through the fields and woods, forming his mind and person in the free air, beside a free and cheerful foster mother. Teresa had become far dearer to him, since he figured her in company with Felix. Even while sitting in the theater, he thought of her with smiles. He was almost in her own case. The stage could now produce no more illusion in him. Serlo and Melina were excessively polite to him when they observed that he was making no pretensions to his former place. A portion of the public wished to see him act again. This he could not accede to, nor in the company did any one desire it, saving Frau Melina. Of this friend he now took leave. He was moved at parting with her. He exclaimed, "Why do we presume to promise anything depending on an unknown future, the most slight engagement? We have not power to keep, far less a purpose of importance. I feel ashamed in recollecting what I promised to you all in that unhappy night when we were lying plundered, sick and wounded, crammed into a miserable tavern. How did misfortune elevate my courage? What a treasure did I think I had found in my good wishes? And of all this not a jot has taken effect. I leave you as your debtor, and my comfort is that our people prized my promise at its actual worth, and never more took notice of it." "Be not unjust to yourself," said Frau Melina. "If no one acknowledges what you have done for us, I at least will not forget it. Our whole condition had been different if you had not been with us. But it is with our purposes as with our wishes. They seem no longer what they were when they have been accomplished, been fulfilled, and we think we have wished for nothing. You shall not by your friendly statement, answered. Wilhelm put my conscience to peace. I shall always look upon myself as in your debt. Nay, perhaps you are so, said Madame Melina, but not in the manner you suppose. We reckon it a shame to fail in the fulfillment of a promise we have uttered, with the voice, O my friend, a worthy person, by his very presence, promises us much the confidence, he elicits the inclination, he inspires the hopes, he awakens our unbounded, he is, and continues in our debt. Although he does not know it, fare you well, if our external circumstances have been happily repaired by your direction in my mind, there is by your departure produced a void, which will not be filled up again so easily. Before leaving the city, Wilhelm wrote a copious sheet to Werner. He had before exchanged some letters, but not being able to agree, they had at length ceased to write now. However, Wilhelm had again approximated to his brother. He was just about to do what Werner had so earnestly desired. He could say, I am abandoning the stage. I mean to join myself with men whose intercourse in every sense must lead me to a sure and suitable activity. He inquired about his property, and it now seemed strange to him that he had never for so long a time disturbed himself about it. He knew not that it is the manner of all persons who attach importance to their inward cultivation, altogether to neglect their outward circumstances. This had been Wilhelm's case. He now for the first time seemed to notice that to work effectively, he stood in need of outward means. He entered on his journey, this time in a temper altogether different from that of last. The prospects he had in view were charming. He hoped to meet with something cheerful by the way. Chapter Roman 9. On returning to Lothario's castle, Wilhelm found that changes had occurred. Jarno met him with the tidings that Lothario's uncle being dead, the baron had himself set out to take possession of the heritage. You come in time, said he, to help the abb and me. Lothario has commissioned us to purchase some extensive properties of land in this quarter. He has long contemplated the bargain, and we have now got cash and credit, just in season. The only point which made us hesitate was that a distant trading house had also views upon the same estates. At length, we have determined to make common cause with it, as otherwise we might outbid each other without need or reason. The trader seems to be a prudent man at present. We are making estimates and calculations. We must also settle economically how the lands are to be shared so that each of us may have a fine estate. The papers were submitted to our friend. The fields, meadows, houses were inspected. And though Jarno and the abb seemed to understand the matter fully, Wilhelm could not help desiring that Teresa had been with them. In these labors several days were spent, and Wilhelm had scarcely time to tell his friends of his adventures and his dubious fatherhood. This incident to him, so interesting, they treated with indifference and levity. He had noticed that they frequently, in confidential conversation while at table or in walks, would suddenly stop short and give their words another application, thereby showing at least that they had on the anvil many things which were concealed from him. He bethought him of what Lydia had said, and he put the greater faith in it, as one entire division of the castle had always been inaccessible to him, the way to certain galleries, particularly to the ancient tower, with which externally he was so well acquainted. He had often sought, and hitherto in vain. One evening Jarno said to him, we can now consider you as ours with such security that it were unjust if we did not introduce you deeper into our mysteries. It is right that a man, when he first enters upon life, should think highly of himself, should determine to attain many eminent distinctions, should endeavor to make all things possible. But when his education has proceeded to a certain pitch, it is advantageous for him that he learn to lose himself among a mass of men, that he learn to live for the sake of others, and to forget himself in an activity prescribed by duty. It is then that he first becomes acquainted with himself, for it is conduct alone that compares us with others. You shall soon see what a curious little world is at your very hand, and how well you are known in it. Tomorrow morning before sunrise be dressed and ready. Jarno came at the appointed hour. He led our friend through certain known and unknown chambers of the castle, then through several galleries, till at last they reached a large old door strongly framed with iron. Jarno knocked. The door went up a little so as to admit one person. Jarno shoved in our friend, but did not follow him. Wilhelm found himself in an obscure and narrow stand. All was dark around him, and when he tried to go a step forward, he found himself hemmed. In a voice not altogether strange to him cried, enter, and he now discovered that the sides of the place where he was were merely hung with tapestry, through which a feeble light glimmered in. To him, enter, cried the voice again. He raised the tapestry and entered. The hall in which he now stood appeared to have at one time been a chapel. Instead of the altar, he observed a large table, raised some steps above the floor, and covered with a green cloth hanging over it on the top of this. A drawn curtain seemed as if it hid a picture on the sides, were spaces beautifully worked and covered in with fine wire knitting like the shelves of a library, only here instead of books. A multitude of rolls had been inserted. Nobody was in the hall. The rising sun shone through the window right on Wilhelm, and kindly saluted him as he came in. "Be seated," cried a voice which seemed to issue from the altar. Wilhelm placed himself in a small armchair, which stood against the tapestry where he had entered. There was no seat, but this in the room. Wilhelm had to be content with it. Though the morning radiance dazzled him, the chair stood fast. He could only keep his hand before his eyes. But now the curtain which hung down above the altar went asunder with a gentle rustling, and showed within a picture frame a dark empty aperture. A man stepped forward at it in a common dress, saluted the astonished looker-in, and said to him, "Do you not recognize me among the many things which you would like to know? Do you feel no curiosity to learn where your grandfather's collection of pictures and statues are at present? Have you forgot the painting which you once so much delighted in? Where think you is the sick king's son, now languishing?" Wilhelm, without difficulty, recognized the stranger whom, in that important night, he had conversed with at the inn. "Perhaps," continued his interrogator, "we should now be less at variance in regard to destiny and character." Wilhelm was about to answer when the curtain quickly flew together. "Strange," said Wilhelm to himself, "can chance occurrences have a connection is what we call destiny? But chance, where is my grandfather's collection? And why am I reminded of it in these solemn moments?" He had not leisure to pursue his thoughts. The curtain once more parted, and a person stood before him, whom he instantly perceived to be the country clergyman that had attended him, and his companions on that pleasure wrestle of theirs. He had a resemblance to the abbe, though he seemed to be a different person. With a cheerful countenance and a tone of dignity, he said, "To guard from error is not the instructor's duty, but to lead the erring pupil, nay, to let him quaff his error in deep satiating draughts. This is the instructor's wisdom. He who only tastes his error will long dwell with it, will take delight in it, as in a singular felicity, while he who drains it to the dregs will, if he be not crazy, find it out." The curtain closed again, and Wilhelm had a little time to think. "What error can he mean?" said he within himself. "But the error which has clung to me through my whole life, that I sought for cultivation, where it was not to be found, that I fancied I could form a talent in me, while without the smallest gift for it." The curtain dashed asunder faster than before. An officer advanced, and said in passing, "Learn to know the men who may be trusted." The curtain closed, and Wilhelm did not long consider, till he found this officer to be the one who had embraced him in the Count's park, and had caused his taking Jarno for a crimp. How that stranger had come hither, who he was, were riddles to our friend. If so many men cried, he took interest in thee. Know thy way of life, and how it should be carried on. Why did they not conduct thee with greater strictness, with greater seriousness? Why did they favor thy silly sports, instead of drawing thee away from them? "Dispute not with us," cried a voice. "Thou art saved, thou art on the way to the goal. None of thy follies wilt thou repent, none wilt thou wish to repeat. No luckier destiny can be allotted to a man." The curtain went asunder, and in full armor stood the old king of Denmark. "In the space I am thy father's spirit," said the figure, "and I depart in comfort, since my wishes for thee are accomplished in a higher sense than I myself contemplated. Steep regions cannot be surmounted save by winding paths on the plain straight roads conduct from place to place. Farewell, and think of me when thou enjoyest what I have provided for thee." Wilhelm was exceedingly amazed and struck. He thought it was his father's voice, and yet in truth it was not. The present and the past alike confounded and perplexed him. He had not meditated long when the abbe came to view, and placed himself behind the green table. "Come hither," cried he to his marveling friend. He went and mounted up the steps on the green cloth. "Lay a little roll here is your indenture," said the abbe. "Take it to heart, it is of weighty import." Wilhelm lifted, opened it, and read. Indenture. "Art is long life, short judgment, difficult opportunity, transient to act, is easy to think, is hard to act according to our thought, is troublesome. Every beginning is cheerful, the threshold is the place of expectation. The boy stands astonished, his impressions guide him. He learns sportfully, seriousness comes on him. By surprise, imitation is born with us. What should be imitated is not easy to discover. The excellent is rarely found, more rarely valued. The height charms us, the steps to it do not with the summit in our eye. We love to walk along the plain. It is but a part of art that can be taught. The artist needs it all. Who knows it half speaks much, and is always wrong. Who knows it wholly inclines to act and speaks seldom or late. The former have no secrets, and no force. The instruction they can give is like baked bread, savory and satisfying for a single day, but flour cannot be sown, and seed corn ought not to be ground. Words are good, but they are not the best. The best is not to be explained by words. The spirit in which we act is the highest matter. Action can be understood and again represented by the spirit alone. No one knows what he is doing while he acts aright, but of what is wrong we are always conscious. Whoever works with symbols only is a pedant, a hypocrite, or a bungler. There are many such, and they like to be together. Their babbling detains the scholar. Their obstinate mediocrity vexes even the best. The instruction which the true artist gives us opens the mind, for where words fail him deeds speak. The true scholar learns from the known to unfold the unknown, and approaches more and more to being a master. Enough, cried the abb, the rest in due time. Now look round you among these cases. Wilhelm went and read the titles of the rolls. With astonishment, he found Lothario's apprenticeship, Jarno's apprenticeship, and his own apprenticeship placed there, with many others whose names he did not know. May I hope to cast a look into these rolls? In this chamber there is now nothing hid from you. May I put a question? Without scruple, and you may expect a positive reply if it concerns a matter which is nearest your heart and ought to be so. Good then, ye marvelous sages whose sight has pierced so many secrets, can you tell me whether Felix is in truth my son? Hail to you for this question, cried the abb, clapping hands for joy. Felix is your son by the holiest that lies hid among us. I swear to you, Felix is your son, nor in our opinion was the mother that is gone unworthy of you receive the lovely child from our hands. Turn round and venture to be happy. Wilhelm heard a noise behind him. He turned round and saw a child's face peeping archly through the tapestry at the end of the room. It was Felix. The boy playfully hid himself so soon as he was noticed. Come forward, cried the abb. He came running. His father rushed towards him, took him in his arms, and pressed him to his heart. Yes, I feel it, cried he. Thou art mine. What a gift of heaven have I to thank my friends for. Whence, or how comest thou, my child, at this important moment? Ask not, said the abb. Hail to the young man. Thy apprenticeship is done. Nature has pronounced thee free.